Chapter 3. Determination. Disclaimer. Only thing I own are my original characters and any, maybe, fruits I decide to add to the story. I hope alternate me is enjoying owning this stuff. And so I may be updating too quickly boot after Chapter 4. Updates should be a little slower. It's mostly excitement that someone might actually be interested in my story. TBH, I didn't think that would be the case, but for those interested, it gets better from here. I would think, but that could just be me. I updated the rating to M for the future because the story gets a bit dark. Descent. Chapter 3. Determination. Mama would always comfort him whenever he cried. Whenever he hurt himself, whenever he was sad, even if he was throwing a tantrum, Mama would always know the perfect way to make him feel better. Big boys don't cry, my little Rose, she would say as she soothingly, wiping away his tears as she hugged him close to her. She always knew how to make him feel better, whether it was cooking his favorite meal or singing to him with her voice that he loved so much. She would always cheer him up. Rosan missed her so much. Maud could only stare sadly at the boy. She wished she could have done more, but this was completely out of her comfort zone. The devil fruit had no idea what to do for the child, and it was destroying her. Rosan had cried himself to sleep in their mindscape, and not once had he left Maud's caring arms. Maud had taken a page out of Rouge's book and hummed softly to him, while stroking his soft hair in reassurance. Eventually, after what felt like hours, the little boy had exhausted himself completely and slept soundly in her grasp. Placing him on the mattress inside their mindscape's home, Maud parted his hair slightly and rested a hand on his forehead. Using modification, the purple-haired woman shut down Rosan's mind temporarily, ensuring that he would have a peaceful rest. He deserved that much at least. The devil fruit sighed softly to herself and made sure everything in the outside world was as it was supposed to be. She had made the interior of the dinghy soft enough so that Rosan would be comfortable sleeping, so there was no concern there, and the weather was rather tranquil. It didn't look like it would be changing anytime soon. Maud was thankful that Rosan had allowed her so much freedom to do what she wanted. She would make sure that nothing bad happened while he rested. Everything was in order now, and nothing seemed out of place. Maud sighed for the umpteenth time, and she sat next to Rosan's sleeping body, idly stroking his soft hair. She allowed herself a moment of rest to gather her thoughts. Honestly, this was such a mess. This had definitely not been a part of her plans. It was never her intentions to endanger Rosan so soon, but plans never worked out the way you wanted them to. Still, this was too awry for even the devil fruit. She had wanted to wait much longer before inevitably setting sail with little Rosan. The boy was only 4 years old after all. He had no business sailing the ocean at such a young age. Luckily, he had her. Maud couldn't imagine what would potentially happen to the child if he hadn't eaten her fruit and still decided to sail on his own, due to his dislike of the world government. It filled her with such dread that she refused to pursue those thoughts. She had wanted Rosan to get a much more firm grasp on his newly acquired abilities, but the world was merciless and now they had to adapt to the new circumstances. No matter, she would do everything she could to make sure no harm came his way. Glancing sadly at the sleeping boy's tear-streaked face, she softly wiped those tears away. Right now, he needed her more than anything. To so willingly give up the bond with his brother just for her safety filled her with a pleasant feeling that made her all the more guilty. She was all he had right now. Because he was suffering so much, she had to be strong for the both of them. It was strange. Maud had never spoken to Rouge yet. The pain she felt at her death was almost strangling. Despite not knowing her personally, it certainly didn't feel that way. Maud had access to all of Rosan's memories after all. Even the ones Rosan didn't personally remember, Maud knew of. All his feelings of Rouge had been emitted to her, and, as a result, she felt everything he felt. It was horrible, truth be told. She had never felt anything like this before, and all she wanted to do was hug Rosan and cry herself to sleep too. Rosan was the first person to open himself up completely to her. The devil fruit was just as new to these powerful emotions as Rosan was. It was overwhelming. In a way, she had also lost her mother. But Maud couldn't let that stop her. The difference between her and Rosan was that she was older. She had experience. The devil fruit had seen many people die. Rosan had never dealt with death, and the first death he had ever witnessed was that of his mother. That was absolutely horrible, and she could feel how much it was tearing at the boy. Rosan was a naive 4-year-old who had known happiness all his life. He didn't have the capabilities to bounce back from this alone. He would try, because he wanted to protect her, but it wouldn't be enough. It was up to her now to raise Rosan in Rouge's stead. She would try and live up to the late mother's standards. No matter what, she would make sure Rosan was safe to do what he wanted. It was her job to support him, and she prioritized that job above all else. She would help him. She would guide him, no matter what. Rosan awoke to the glare of the sun. The air tasted of salt, and a cool winter breeze brushed against his skin. Unaffected by it all, Rosan blearily opened his eyes to an unfamiliar environment. His body felt heavy, and the boy was more exhausted than he'd ever been. Normally, he was energetic even when he first woke up. Mama liked to call him an unstoppable ball of energy while tiredly glaring at him with her mug of coffee. Sitting up to shrug off the sluggishness, Rosan blinked before the full events of yesterday ruthlessly came rushing back to him. Frantically, the redhead sat up, desperately hoping that it was all just a really bad dream, that he would be home and he could tell Mama about the really scary dream. But all that greeted him was the surrounding ocean and the distant squealing of seagulls. Of course it wasn't a dream. Mama was gone and he was never going to see her again. Tears started streaming down the 4-year-old's face as he recalled the events of last night, and he let out an anguished sob. He wasn't ready to say goodbye to his mama. How could he ever be? She had always been there for him as a constant presence that he felt safe with, and without her, he felt truly lost. He couldn't even honor her last wish. Rosan had willingly left Ace, his newborn baby brother, behind with that Marine. A terrible gnawing feeling filled him as he recalled the previous day. He didn't want to admit it. He really didn't, but, for a moment, he had truly hated Ace for taking away his mother. He fully blamed his baby brother, who was not even an hour-old yet at the time, for killing Mama. The soul-crushing realization that he had thought that of his younger brother filled him with such a sense of self-loathing that Rosan felt ill. His first hour as an older brother, and he failed miserably. Mama wanted him to shower Ace in all the love she wouldn't be able to, and he did the complete opposite. He was the worst. No, he didn't deserve to take care of Ace. Ace would be better off without a brother who couldn't even stand him. No matter how short it had been, no matter how much he regretted it, it didn't change the fact that Rosan felt those feelings, and that was unacceptable. He would pursue him when they were both older and explain himself no matter what. He owed him an apology at the very least for being such a terrible older brother. It was what he deserved. He just hoped that Ace could grow into the man Mama wanted him to be. Rosan wasn't sure he'd be able to live up to her wishes. He felt absolutely terrible. The boy grabbed a mirror from his bag and enlarged it to get a look at himself. Deep bags under red-rimmed eyes, dry tear streaks, hair splayed messily over his head. He looked as awful as he felt. No, scratch that. He would never look as awful as he currently felt. He was a complete mess. Rosan could feel it deep inside of himself. A boiling sensation was forming in his core, and whenever he focused on it, bad thoughts happened. The boy couldn't identify what it was, but it didn't make him feel good at all. It filled him with such bitterness that he just wanted to go back to sleep and forget about it all. Why? Why did he have to lose his mama? What had he done to deserve this? Before, he had blamed Ace, but Ace didn't ask to be born, and Mama loved his little brother just as much as she loved him. It would never be Ace's fault, and Rosan felt even worse knowing that he had tried to put the blame on him. The blame lied on two people, the Marines and Papa. Papa had dragged the Marines into their business. GOLD. Roger knew how notorious he was, and anywhere he went, the world government would be watching him. He shouldn't have been so obvious when he came to Batarilla. Yet, the Pirate King had waltzed into his home without a care in the world, wooed his mother, got her pregnant, left without guaranteeing her safety, and died while simultaneously having all the Marines converge onto his home. He left Rouge to the Marines by himself like a complete idiot. His stupidity had gotten Mama killed. If Roger had not been dead, Rosan would have loved to make him think he was. Rosan glared darkly at the floor of the ship. Because of him, The Marines had spent 10 entire months scouring their home and killing every baby they could get their hands on, all in hopes of ending the late Pirate King's lineage. The Marines, how disgusting of them. Killing someone for the sins of their parents was horrible and downright evil. Why did Ace have to be punished for what Roger did? Did that mean if they knew Rosan was their child, he would be punished too? Why? He hadn't done anything. He didn't deserve to die because Roger decided to cause havoc onto the world. None of them did. Not him. Not Ace. Not Mama. How could they ruin the lives of family with no remorse? Rosan hadn't done anything to be treated like this. He was only 4. So why was his existence a crime? No, why did they get to decide that his existence was a crime before he had given them a reason? Who were they to play Cammy? At that moment, Rosan swore to himself. The Marines would pay, the ones in charge, the grunts, even that old man who took Ace. All of them would pay. Papa no. Roger was dead, so all the blame lied solely on them. They killed his mother. They took his mama away from him. His sweet, caring mama that he loved more than anything. The one who had always been there for him. The one who he'd never be able to see again. They had taken her. That was unforgivable. Rosan, please calm down. This isn't like you. A voice spoke up soothingly, managing to shock Rosan out of his dark brooding. The redhead's eyes widened in realization. That was right. He couldn't actively go to war with them right now. He had to protect Ma-chan. She was his friend, and she was all he had left, and Rosan clung to that detail like it was a lifeline. Rosan still had Ma-chan. He still had her. He couldn't lose her. Slowly, his rage subsided, and the Mod Nomi user was able to temporarily force his sadness down. Ma-chan was right. He needed to calm down or else he'd do something costly. Wiping his tears away, anguish made way for determination and Rosan straightened up. He couldn't be sad yet. Not when Ma-chan still needed him. He needed to get as strong as possible to protect them both, or else something disastrous could happen. If he lost Ma-chan too, he didn't know what he would do. Rosan would become strong, the strongest. After he was the strongest, after he was capable enough of protecting Ma-chan and himself, he would seek out Ace and try to explain himself to his baby brother. He didn't care if Ace hated him because Rosan deserved to be despised by his younger brother. After all, Ace's older brother had willingly chosen to leave him behind moments after he was born. He didn't deserve forgiveness from the baby, but he would make sure Ace knew the truth at least. The boy deserved that. Ma-chan, we need to become strong at all costs. I'm okay now, so I need you to help me as much as possible, okay? The boy sounded firm as he addressed his body's resident.
Mod frevnt af Rosanes hypocrisy.
Not long ago, the 4-year-old had blown up on his mother for doing the exact same thing to him that he was attempting to do to her. It was even worse because Maud knew, being inside of the boy, exactly how he felt. How could he get upset at Rouge for hiding her pain away from him, then proceed to do the same to her? Like mother, like son, she supposed. Rosan, please don't lie to me ever again, Maud said kindly, but firmly. You can trust me with your problems, I promise. There was absolutely no way the child, especially one as young as Rosan, was okay this soon. It just was not feasible. She admired him for trying to put up a tough front for the both of them, but it wasn't healthy what he was doing. Rosan frowned slightly and said, I know I can trust you, Ma-chan. I'm sorry. It's just, I have to be okay. The Seagull guys aren't going to wait for us to grow up. If they learn that I have one of their most prized devil fruits, they will chase us to the end of the world. Fierce with determination, Rosan continued by saying, we need to be strong enough so that they can't take us, Ma-chan. We have to be. If I'll lose you too, then I don't know what I'll do. Maud wanted, so badly, to disagree with him. He shouldn't have to shoulder such a burden at his age. This was something he should have worried about when he reached adulthood, after spending more time with her and maturing, not while he was 4. For the first time since he obtained her abilities, Maud regretted the fact that Rosan ate her fruit. He wasn't ready, but he felt forced to be, all because of her. She wanted to disagree with what he was saying, but she couldn't because he was right. They would be hunted down relentlessly and, if Rosan wasn't ready, they would take him with no issue. All because of her. Rosan was quick to notice her own self-loathing and shut down that line of thought.
Modshan.
He began seriously. It's not your fault. Even though I'm not Mama's real child, I'm still the son of the Pirate King, and they would want to hurt me anyways. Me having you is just a bonus for him now. Don't you dare try and blame yourself, or I'll get mad. He finished with a scowl forming on his face. If anything, I'd be in even more trouble if I didn't have you when they did come for me, so thanks for giving me such a big advantage, Mod-chan. Rosan beamed at her, showing a tiny glimpse of that happy-go-lucky boy. Mod was in pleasant disbelief. She was feeling rather flushed at Rosan's sincere compliment of her and tried desperately to compose herself due to the unfamiliar, but not unpleasant, sensation. She failed miserably. Face still rosy, she instead decided to divert attention from herself. You know that you are adopted? How? Your mother never told you, Maud pointed out with a raised brow. Rosan's response was quick, easy, and it showed that the boy knew for a while. I look nothing like Mama, and I've seen pictures of Pap Roger. My hair color isn't the same as either of theirs, and it's not dyed either. Mama told me Roger was my papa as well, and I know she didn't love anyone else. So I figured Mama didn't give birth to me, he explained to a wide-eyed Maud. That doesn't matter to me, though, Rosan exclaimed simply with a small smile on his face. She raised me like my mama, loved me like she was my mama, and took care of me like she's my mama, so she's my one and only mama, the 4-year-old finished. Despite the situation, even just talking about Rouge was enough to put a smile on the boy's face. Maud had known Rosan was smarter than he acted, but despite having access to everything about him, she hadn't realized just how intelligent the boy actually was, but it made a lot of sense. Her user was quick on the uptake of things, and he was rather talented. So you don't resent Rouge for not telling you the truth? She asked hesitantly. Nope, why would I? Mama is my mama, and I love her. She could never have told me, and I wouldn't care because in my eyes she's my only parent. Roger is only my papa because she said so, and I don't even know my real parents. Maud couldn't help but marvel at his response. She agreed with him completely, and to see that he didn't hold a shred of resentment towards her was inspiring to the devil fruit. That's a very mature outlook, Rosan. It makes me feel at ease with the idea of helping you become even stronger. Eyes widening in excitement, the 4-year-old said, So that means? Yes, I will use my past knowledge to help you to the best of my ability, Maud informed him, smiling as she felt Rosan's happiness spike. You're right, Rosan. We do need to get stronger, and as much as I hate the idea of putting you through this, it needs to be done for your sake. Rosan nodded rapidly in agreement. He was happy that Maud-chan was capable of seeing reason, and he loved that she respected him enough to listen to him, despite the fact that he was 4 years old. But, Maud said seriously, grabbing the boy's attention once again, promise me this, Rosan. Promise me that you won't let your anger rule you like it did before. I hate seeing such a kind boy like you acting so dark. It saddens me immensely, so please, smile for me again? Rosan was rather hesitant to make another promise. The last promise he made with Mama, who was the one who told him the importance of the vows, was left fresh in his mind, and a wave of resentment washed over him. The boy flinched at the feeling and ruthlessly stamped it away. His last one may not have gone well, but this was Maud-chan. She was so sincere in her request that he had to listen to it. It made Rosan blush that someone was able to compliment him so earnestly, so the boy wanted to live up to her expectations. It's not like the feeling in his pit felt good anyways. Even his mama was falling victim to it, and that just wouldn't do. He much preferred being happy anyways, so this was an easy promise to fulfill. The last vestiges of Rosan's inner rage vanished completely, for now, and the cheerful boy tentatively came out again. Maud-chan was right, he couldn't let himself fall victim to his anger. If he did, bad things might happen to them both.
All right, Modshan.
Rosan began cheerfully, getting a happy grin out of the woman. I promise. Going with that monster of a marine, Rosan thought offhandedly, was probably a better option than training with this slave driver. Maud-chan was also a monster. Relentless, efficient, and, above all else, ruthless. Maud worked Rosan to the core in their mindscape, filling his 4-year-old head with all sorts of knowledge, to the point he got dizzy. Maud made true on her word to train him. Not a day went by where the redhead was not learning something new, and he practically felt his brain growing. The worst thing about it was the apologetic smile she had on her pretty face the entire time. Rosan blessed his near eidetic memory, else he feared his brain might explode. One of the first things she had taught him was learning and understanding the structure and build of a ship, along with the correct materials and how they were made. Ships are the primary form of travel in this world, and you will be traveling on one for a majority of our time together. Knowing how to manage one will be necessary and a boon in the future, were her strict words. She then proceeded to make sure he learned everything that she knew about ships. It was clear Maud had experience with him from the amount that he learned. She refused to give him a break at all either, stating that his body was already resting in the real world. "Still a growing boy, my ass," Rosan grumbled, remembering her words. "Language," her voice said kindly, and Rosan squeaked as he heard that. The redhead hastily apologized, causing Maud to giggle. Training was separated into 3 parts: knowledge building, physical training, and ability training. Knowledge building, as its name suggested, was where Maud-chan took the time to build up his knowledge on various topics. She would drag him into their mindscape and promptly drill him with information. Rosan, in turn, soaked up all information taught to him like a sponge. He rarely stayed on a single topic for more than a day due to how quickly he grasped what she spoke of. Maud-chan had been immensely impressed by his penchant for learning, and Rosan beamed happily at her praise. He still hated it, though. It was easily his least favorite of the 3. Physical training involved building up muscle, though Maud-chan refused to make him do anything too extensive. "You're too young," she said firmly, and refused to listen to his reasoning. Rosan only received a deadpan glance as he tried to argue against her, and that was the end of that. So, he had been relegated to doing stretches and relatively easy exercises that were made difficult by his young, tiny body. Rosan could only sulk at how easily she dismissed him. Maud-chan was mean. Ability training was where Rosan trained with the Maud no Mi. This was easily his favorite part of training. Maud-chan and him would sit and practice modification together. Maud-chan wanted him to start small, and typically, he would modify what he learned at that moment. It was like homework. On his first day, for example, he had made Maud-chan a miniature boat to show that he understood what she taught him. The purple-haired woman had been proud of him and showered him in head pats, which always reduced the boy to putty. He also enjoyed brainstorming other things he could do, mostly for combat. His biggest goal was to transform into a dragon, but Maud-chan had explicitly stated that he would not be doing that yet, and he begrudgingly agreed. The 4-year-old would still be reading up on dragons, though. She hadn't said it was impossible, so that meant he could do it, and if he could do it, then he would do it. Maud-chan just sighed in fond exasperation and allowed him to do as he pleased. She wasn't even sure if he could do that, but she wouldn't tell the boy otherwise. It was good to give him a short-term goal that he could focus on. Maybe he would prove her wrong. His thinking was already proving to be more versatile than hers in regards to what her fruit could do. She had always been rather rigid, but the redhead's creative mind was already helping her see things in a way she hadn't seen them before. It was fascinating to see how the mind of a 4-year-old worked with her fruit. Maud's training was very effective, and Rosan was making progress in spades. But now, he was bored. Training was nearly done, and, to stave off his boredom, he was finishing his stretches. Letting out a grunt of exertion, Rosan stood up from the floor, and the boy let out a relieved sigh as he stretched his back to release the tension. The 4-year-old let out a happy groan at the cracking noise. Plopping himself down again, Rosan sat cross-legged as he contemplated what to do. They had been sailing for 3 weeks now, and Rosan had seen nothing but water, seagulls, fish, and more water. He was bored, and he wanted something to do. The redhead had his toys that he had stored in his bag, but Rosan had tried playing with them once and immediately burst into tears. The memories were far too much for his still raw mind. He hadn't touched them since. Rosan was thankful he had thought to bring food and spare clothes. If not for his ingenuity, he probably wouldn't have even been able to take everything. He had nearly emptied his room out, shrunk everything, and stored all of it in his newly created space bag. It was an awesome name. Rosan didn't have to be told twice. Honestly, Rosan didn't even know how he had thought of the space bag. He just wanted to be able to store all his things in there, and he guessed modification listened to him. What an awesome ability. But nothing in his space bag was able to sufficiently distract him. Mod-chan wouldn't let him train all day, either, so he couldn't even distract himself with that.
Ne, Mod-chan.
What is it, Rosan? She replied immediately.
I'm bored.
Was his simple reply, and Maud let out a suffering sigh. She half expected as much.
Fine.
What do you have planned, Rosan? Rosan grinned, sharp canines on full display. Mod-chan would normally talk him down with a resounding no, but she was finally seeing things his way. Truthfully, Mod just wanted to avoid the headache this route was going to take. Rosan's plans were rather eccentric. Adopting a thinking pose, Rosan rubbed his chin in contemplation. Despite Mod-chan practically giving him free reins to decide, there was still a lot of ocean and no island in sight. Not only that, part of the reason why he was so bored out on sea was because his little boat didn't allow him much freedom of movement at all. Looking down at the dinghy, Rosan suddenly had a marvelous idea. Grinning widely, the wielder of modification said, Mod-chan, let's steal a ship.
Mod blinked.
That wasn't what she was expecting. He wanted to steal a ship? What even gave him that idea in the first place? She thought he was going to ask for more ideas of what to do with modification, not this. The devil fruit asked as much, and in response, the child simply stated, well, you said I can't do too much training 'cause of the size of this ship, and I can't have any sort of fun on a boat this small, so let's just get a new one. We'll be killing 2 stones with 1 bird. 2 birds with 1 stone, Rosan, she corrected. My version sounds better, he decided stubbornly. Maud's purple hair bobbed in time with the shake of her head as a startling realization hit her. Rosan was insane. That was the conclusion she finally reached. She had her doubts before because he was only 4, but now, she knew that he was undeniably unhinged and age had nothing to do with it. When Maud had asked him what he had planned, Rosan's idea to steal a ship was definitely not on the forefront of her mind. Even worse, his reasoning was solid. It wasn't the best. She could have just made the dinghy larger. But she was sure that Rosan would have refused because the purple-eyed boy seemed dead set on stealing a ship. Sighing, she had been doing that a lot. In defeat, Mod-chan asked him, just how do you plan on stealing a ship? Rosan smiled triumphantly and said, well, we have to find one first, and I know just how. Seriously, it was insane just how smart he was. He had already planned for this. Great job, Rosan. Really, amazing job. His devil fruit just stared at the boy, shamelessly praising himself. It wasn't even worth acknowledging sometimes. Stealing a ship implies that you want to fight, Rosan, Maud pointed out. Need I remind you that you are 4 years old? Do you plan on fighting adults, who are most likely pirates, right now? Rosan could practically feel her judgmental stare, and she no doubt had her hands on her hips. Sweating just a little at his guardian, Rosan responded frantically in a way that would no doubt sway her. Well, I wasn't planning on fighting a strong group of people, I promise. The boy exclaimed. He continued in hopes of further convincing her. I have you, Mod-chan. You'll keep me safe, I know it. You can guide me, and I'll be extra careful. If I mess up, you'll save me. Damn it, the manipulative brat knew just what to say to tug at her judgment. Blushing at his praise, Mod-chan cursed Rosan for being so aware. Fine, it's a bit early to be running combat exercises, but, with your natural capabilities, I'm confident it won't be too difficult. Rosan cheered in excitement, and he barely restrained himself from jumping around. He might fall in the water. All right. Convincing Mod-chan was the hard part. The woman was incredibly protective of him, but Rosan loved her for that. Next came another hard part. There were more hard parts than he had anticipated. Glancing hesitantly at the bag, Rosan steeled himself as he gathered his courage. He was being ridiculous. Mama had always told him big boys don't cry, and damn it, he was a big boy. Rosan shook away his apprehension and expanded the small bag into something sizable enough to comfortably fit his hand into. Rummaging around a bit, the child let out a victorious shout as he found what he was looking for. Pulling out the object, Rosan took in its appearance with a triumphant smile. Looking at the toy, a bird to be exact, Rosan banished away any negative thoughts he suddenly had and got to work. Mama had gotten him this toy blue jay a few months ago. Her reasoning had been that animals enjoyed being around him and vice versa, so she got it for him. Rosan loved it even without the reasoning. She gave it to him after all. It was a simple wooden design. As its name suggested, it was dominantly blue color with a white underbelly and a moderate amount of black dashed around its body. It was about 25 centimeters and fit easily into his tiny palms. Nodding to himself at the object, it would be just perfect. Rosan quickly got to work. Rosan said, "Modify, state," followed by modification, vision pair, user Rosan. Rosan was far more prepared this time around as the formerly wooden bird turned mechanical and began sharing vision with him. Rosan let the bird go and watched as it experimentally tested its new body. It unsteadily flew for a few seconds, not unlike a baby bird, before getting the hang of it and dashing around in excitement. Rosan watched with just a bit of envy. He would be able to fly freely like that eventually. The blue jay, coming from Rosan, understood its assignment immediately and took off in a flash. Rosan plopped himself down and the boy began shaking in anticipation. Remembering what Madchan said about hiding their identity, Rosan began looking for a new outfit to wear. He fully planned on using modification, so that meant he had to disguise himself. With that, Rosan got to work. In a rather short amount of time, the blue jay had found a ship. They must have been closer to an island than they had initially thought. Maybe that knowledge would have stopped Rosan from thinking of such a wild plan. Who are we kidding? The boy just wanted an excuse to do something insane. It went unnoticed by the occupants of the ship as it scouted out the soon-to-be opponents of its master. They were a pirate crew, albeit what seemed to be a newly formed one. They had a basic Jolly Roger on their flag. There was a standard skull with crossbones, though. One of the bones was replaced with a basic saber. The ship itself was not very impressive, being a standard caravel with a simple design, but for someone of Rosan's size it would be perfect, if not a bit large. As for the members of the crew, they seemed to all be out and about on the main deck. 6 men lounged about on the ship, laughing about something the bird could not pick up. None seemed to be equipped with anything dangerous, though 2 of them held weapons. One had a dagger and the other a short sword. Narrowing its vision a bit, it confirmed that none of them had visible guns. Chirping happily at the information gathered, Rosan, had just assigned it a gender, preened as he accepted Rosan's bountiful praises. It began flying back to meet up with the boy currently sailing over to its location. Rosan was shuddering in excitement, and he had a wild grin on his face. He was about to engage in actual combat with people. The redhead was looking so forward to this. Remembering all of what Madchan told him, Rosan knew he had this in the bag. He would not underestimate them either. Madchan told him underestimating the opponent was a great way to get seriously injured, or die, and dying would suck, so Rosan would be alert at all times. As he mentally commanded the dinghy to set sail in the direction of the ship, Rosan took the time to look at his new guise. After some advice from Madchan, Rosan had opted to dress in a long black cloak. It fully covered his figure, stopping it just above his feet. He had even modified the hoodie so that it could better coat his face in darkness. Rosan's face would be nearly impossible to see. Taking even more measures, in case someone had managed to take his hoodie off, Maud was very efficient. Rosan had even placed a mask on. Contrasting his mostly black outfit, it was a white mask that covered his entire face. The only notable design was the black rose that curved onto one side. Under the cloak was a shirt that was the same white, with black markings, as his mask, and long black pants that were both easy to move in and comfortable. To finish it off, he wore black combat boots. Despite it being unlikely that anyone would see these, Maud insisted that he wear it, so he did. Rosan looked down at himself and hummed in content. He liked it a lot. It could use a bit more color. He sighed despondently at the lack of red, but he was going for efficiency, not style, and it helped that he looked cool as hell regardless. Nodding in satisfaction, Rosan held out his hand and pet the mechanical bird that landed on it. It tweeted in happiness at his gentle touch, and Rosan smiled at a job well done. "Just one last thing from you, okay?" Rosan said softly, grabbing the bird's attention. "I want you to fly above me, be on the lookout for any sneak attacks, and make sure you let me know." It sang an affirmation, and Rosan watched as it flew off again, but not before giving him an affectionate pinch on the cheek. The ship came into view and Rosan started shaking. He was so excited. Wanting to avoid getting spotted, Rosan looked down at the dinghy. Modify, color, camo. Smiling in success as the ship vanished from sight, Rosan quickly applied it to himself as well and waited with a bated breath as he finally approached the unaware passengers. Just one last thing to do, and he would be fully ready. Modify, speed, power, x2. Rosan discovered that he could multiply his base physical stats and, though it wasn't much for a 4-year-old, having double his normal strength would help tremendously. Multiplying his strength by 2 would be insanely useful. Man, he was getting so good with modification. He had a plan already too. He would take advantage of his surprise attack by taking out the 2 with weapons as quickly as possible, then he'd wing it and fight the others. Though he wasn't underestimating them, they looked new, weak, and they were currently slacking. It would be perfect. What a fantastic plan, Rosan, Maud said in a deadpan, but Rosan did not notice. I know, was all he said. Maud's sweat dropped at the boy cheering at his simple plan. He was unbelievable, honestly. Nico Robin wasn't sure why she had thought traveling with this crew was a good idea. They were a hardy bunch of upstarts who had thought it would be smart to use her impressively high bounty to gain notoriety. Idiots, all of them. They wouldn't last a month. Such hubris wouldn't be good for her safety. They probably thought going to Grand Line as they were now was a great idea. They were definitely not going to last long. The Marines had quickly been getting the gain on her, so, in an act of desperation, she had agreed to travel with them for the moment. It wouldn't be long, just enough for her to escape the Marines' vision, then she'd slip out and disappear, leaving them to get destroyed on their own. The brunette doubted she'd be staying with them much longer, though. They were bound to get annihilated, then captured, before she could even ditch them, and she wouldn't be here to go out with them. It was either that, or they would try and turn her in to cash in on her bounty. Leaving them was the most inevitable choice. It always was. Though, it seemed it would be done sooner rather than later. Since O'Hara had been destroyed by the world government, Robin rarely had a moment to rest. She always had to sleep with one eye open, and it was impossible to trust anybody due to the fact that, given the opportunity, they would turn her in without a second thought. Having a bounty of 79 million berry tended to do that to people. But she would enjoy a moment of respite with this crew before she left. They were nothing special, and the 8-year-old was confident that, down the line, they wouldn't be able to stop her from leaving. Currently, all the current members, barring her, were lounging on the main deck, and she had opted to stay in one of the rooms. She was lying down reading a book about the geography of the South Blue, as the nonsensical chatter outside devolved into panicked yells. Wait, panicked yells? Robin paused as she heard their captain frantically attempt to give out orders. By the sounds of things, they were being attacked. But by what? Had her cover already been blown by the Marines? This was really bad. No one on the crew had a bounty yet, so that could only mean they were here for her. Robin bit her lip in a small amount of worry. She had no clue how close to an island she was. They had just left one, but there was no way she could swim there because, obvious reasons. She could try and look for a spare dinghy, but she doubted they had one. She was trapped. The devil fruit user would probably have to fight her way out if it got bad. She hoped that it wasn't a large platoon and that her crew was at least somewhat useful at thinning them. She cursed to herself. This is why she hated joining people who didn't stay in one place. Activating the Hana Hana no Mi, Robin watched what was unfolding through the eyeball she just created, and the 8-year-old set out to find a location to hide in. For now, she would hide and hope they didn't find her. If push came to shove, she would have to fight her way out. Depending on who they sent and how much there was, it was possible she could get away. In the meantime, it would be a good idea to assess the threat level outside. A little earlier, Rosan smiled smugly to himself. Camouflaging himself and his lil boat was turning out to be quite the boon. The crew he was about to attack didn't see him coming at all. As he approached the ship, the 4-year-old ran through what he was going to do again. It was simple enough. Target the people with weapons, incapacitate them, beat him all up, win, new ship. It was foolproof. If things didn't work out then well, Rosan had Madchan to bail him out. He was practically invincible right now. Stay focused, Rosan. Maud's voice came out and Rosan nodded in subdued excitement. Contrary to belief, he was actually pretty focused right now. The boy really wanted to fight them, and he didn't want to make any mistakes. The boy finally reached the ship, and his grin got even wider. It was showtime. As quietly as possible, so as to not be detected, Rosan modified the surface of his gloved hands, giving it a sticky feature, and slowly but surely begun climbing the exterior of the ship. He couldn't disappoint Madchan on his very first plan. Getting caught before he could even begin would definitely make her more resistant to ideas like this in the future. Grasping the rails, Rosan pulled himself up and disabled the sticky feature of his glove as he sat on the rail. He had seen it from his robo-bird's vision, but seeing it up close and in person was a much different experience than from a bird's eye view. There were 6 people, and only 2 of them had visible weapons. Rosan knew this already, of course, but it did a good job at keeping him focused on the task at hand. They were lounging about, and no one had noticed him. Good. That meant his camouflage was holding up nicely and doing its intended job. Unless they knew he was there, or they had some insane observation skills, it would be hard to notice him. Well, no more basking in his own glory for now, regrettably. It was time to get started. Jumping off the railing quietly and crouching slightly, Rosan let loose an inaudible exhale and blasted himself forward. The boy practically flew at one of the weapon-wielding pirates, a dirty blonde-haired man casually flipping a dagger. And, in a moment's notice, Rosan, who was still not visible to them, reached the man and delivered a momentum-heavy flying kick to his solar plexus. The man's eyes widened in shock as he bent over, but, before he could even let out another breath, Rosan firmly grasped his hair and kneed him in the nose 3 times with a crack, causing blood to gush out and staining the floor beneath him. The older man's eye rolled to the back of his skull, and he collapsed onto the ship's deck with a thud. Rosan didn't feel remotely winded, and he grinned eagerly. The hooded boy pocketed his dagger then, without any hesitation, modified the man's weight and threw him overboard. The remaining members could only watch with confused gazes, as Haruto crouched over with a gushing nose accompanied by a cracking noise and summarily faint. That confusion turned into panic when something picked him up, as if he were a baby, and tossed him overboard into the unforgiving ocean. Capitalizing on their shock, Rosan rocketed off again to the next person. His target this time was the other man wielding a weapon. This one was even more bland than the first one and held a short sword instead of a dagger. He had short brown hair that wouldn't be easy to grab onto, and had a long-sleeved shirt to complement the cold weather. Rosan soared towards his next target and chose that moment to remove his camouflage, showing the entire crew the mini black-clad figure. Kaoru, the brown-haired man, looked on in fear as he recognized he was the rocketing stranger's target. He held up his weapon, a short sword, to defend himself, but his slight hesitation cost him. Latching onto his outstretched arm, Rosan used his much smaller frame in order to push himself up to the man's face. In the process, Kaoru stumbled a bit, and, like a shark in the water, the child capitalized on it. Rosan used his enhanced strength to push Kaoru onto the floor, and he began pummeling the poor man's face with vicious strikes. No part of his face was safe, but, in particular, his nose was victim to his brutal onslaught the most. Madchan had told him it was always a good idea to target the nose of someone because of his small, lighter frame. The nose was a rather weak structure and was quite susceptible to damage, so it was a good idea to target it in a fight. Rosan took full advantage of that. The man flailed as Rosan ruthlessly punched the hell out of him. Right before he succumbed to his injuries, he managed to nick Rosan's side with short sword due to the flailing, which caused the boy to grunt and increase the ferocity of the blows. He soon fell unconscious from the figure's aggression, and Rosan repeated the same process he had done with the other man. The splash of the water was rather satisfying to hear. The 4-year-old winced at the injury he received on his side. It wasn't fatal, due to being a wild and unfocused strike. But, on the 4-year-old, it still hurt a fair bit. It wasn't enough to take him out of the fight, though. He wouldn't be here if a small injury was all it took to render him useless. Rosan mockingly dusted his hands together after he finished tossing the man overboard. He would have maybe felt bad, but his mama had told him most pirates were bad people and wouldn't hesitate to hurt him. Pap, Roger was the exception, of course. He couldn't care less what happened to them after tossing them overboard. That was for them to figure out, because the crew didn't matter to him at all. Maud was a bit shocked at how ruthless he was. Though, she found that it didn't surprise her as much she thought it would. Rosan was a boy who only cared about the people he liked after all. Nobody else mattered to the rather selfish boy. Some random individuals would hardly bother the boy, and Maud was completely okay with that. It's not like they mattered to her either. Only Rosan mattered to the devil fruit. She had to praise him where praise was due. He had executed the first 2 parts of his plan near flawlessly. He didn't have to drop the camouflage, but Rosan was a total show-off, and so it didn't surprise her. The purple-haired woman had been a bit worried when he got nicked by the blade, but it didn't seem to bother him enough to stop, so she wasn't panicking. Maud focused a bit of her abilities onto the wound's location, so as to speed up the recovery process, just to be safe though. Still, Maud turned her chin up a bit in pride at how well Rosan was doing. The boy was naturally talented, but she had still taught him well. Rosan turned to the 4 other members in order to assess their reaction to what he had just done. It was natural that they would display a small bit of fear towards the figure who had easily dismantled 2 of their members. The redhead wanted to capitalize on their fear. Fear made them sloppy, and that made it easier for Rosan to do as he pleased. It would be bad to give them a moment to compose themselves. If he did, they might use their numbers advantage on him, and that would mean he'd have to use more visible modification techniques. He would need to keep the pressure onto them, not giving them a moment to breathe. Rosan crouched. The 4-year-old began sprinting forward to maintain his advantage. The man, who looked to be the captain, was frantically giving out orders. Rosan smiled to himself. They were slow on the uptake of orders. It was definitely a newer crew. Learning this info made the masked boy quickly change up his strategy. Rosan swiftly pivoted to the right, facing the one who seemed quickest to take his orders, and charged after him. This was so exciting. What the fuck is that thing? Daichi, the captain of the recently created Saber Pirates, watched in disbelief as a seemingly invisible force took out Haruto and, after revealing itself to be a black-clad figure, Kaoru within moments. That disbelief quickly turned into fear as both the unconscious bodies got thrown overboard. Just what exactly was happening right now? Were they under attack by a ghost? They weren't even a known crew yet. Why on earth were they being attacked? Daichi had only recently created this crew after gathering the courage to act out on Gold Roger's final words. He had formed it with a ragtag group of individuals who all had the dream of earning riches beyond their dreams. They weren't sure how achievable their goal was, and they had their doubts, but the recruitment of the Devil Child, Nico Robin, had been a huge boost to their spirits. Fat lot of good that was doing them. Now they were getting absolutely demolished by some black-clad creature that didn't even reach 4 feet, and the only person with a bounty in the crew was nowhere to be seen at the moment. If she were here, this fight would be far too easy. She had sunk 6 battleships after all. This would have been a piece of cake for her. This creature, it knew exactly what it was doing as well. The moment he tried to give out orders, the creature had turned its attention to Kin, his closest friend and first mate, and immediately engaged him in combat. Kin, being his longest friend, was naturally the one that was quickest to react to his orders, and that thing picked up on it instantly. Well, it didn't matter. All pirates had ordeals, and this just happened to be the first ordeal of the Saber Pirates. It was time to show what they could do. It's just one person and, they're so tiny, this should be a piece of cake, he thought with faux confidence that was quickly wavering at seeing how the thing's exchange with his first mate was going. Maybe his confidence was unwarranted at the moment. Robin wasn't really sure what to think right now. The 8-year-old knew that her crew was weak, but this was kind of insane. They were about to get utterly thrashed. She could tell from the way the first 2 crew members were dealt with. She contemplated helping them, but quickly dismissed the idea. Whoever that was attacking them surely had a devil fruit of some kind, and the fellow devil fruit user was not keen on matching them up with each other. Maybe they had one that could turn them invisible? Robin wasn't confident in her chances of taking him on, and she, truthfully, really didn't care what happened to this crew. The Hana Nomi user had found a suitable hiding spot, and she was hesitant to leave just to potentially throw her life away. She just hoped that after they were finished, they would leave. It didn't seem like he was after her in particular. If he were a part of Cypher Pole, The crew wouldn't have needed to be thrown over the ship. There would be no chance of them waking up. That begged the question, though. Just what was he here for? Until she found out, she felt it was best if that thing didn't know she was there. Yes, she would stay here and hope for the best. Silently, she watched as he suddenly changed directions and approached Kin, the first mate, with zero hesitation. Rosan was having so much fun. Who knew beating the hell out of people could fill him with such glee? The redhead knew this was a good idea. Sure, the cut hurt, but he was used to a bit of pain. Heh. Who said being clumsy was a bad thing? Who was he kidding? It sucked, and it had given him a good amount of injuries in his 4 years of living. Normally, when the boy hurt himself, he would have Mama to help him with the injury. Shaking his head to rid himself of such thoughts, Rosan instead focused on the opponent in front of him. This one reacted the easiest to the orders of the captain, so Rosan would take him out first. Charging him with his enhanced speed, Rosan ducked under the pirate's grabbing arms by sliding between his legs. Pushing himself up into a handstand, he twisted his body and delivered a swift kick to the back of the man's knee. The man cried out in pain as he was forcefully pushed down onto one leg, but Rosan wasn't finished with him just yet. Rosan flipped himself up from his handstand, grabbed the back of the man's shirt and yanked. Using the sudden momentum, Rosan launched himself upwards, putting himself above the man, while simultaneously forcing his opponent to lean back from the pole. Kin's eyes rolled to the back of his skull as his face was met with 2 black boots that slammed harshly into him. He was knocked into sweet oblivion as his head brutally bounced off the deck. Stepping off of the man's face, Rosan watched as the other 2 finally gathered their wits and surrounded him. 2 on 1? How unfair. Rosan grinned excitedly. For them at least. He jumped over one of the 2 who had dove for him. Before he could pull himself up, Rosan was already descending onto him. Landing softly on his back, Rosan paused for 1 second, before jumping up high and slamming down onto the poor man's back once, twice, 3 times before stopping. Ouch! Maud said offhandedly, and Rosan nearly snorted aloud. He settled for a mental one instead. The man spit out a glob of saliva as a very audible crack came from his back. He was instantly knocked unconscious from the pain, and his head lolled on the floor. Rosan wiped his foot on the man's very broken back and looked over at the second to last crewmate. This one looked to be the most afraid of him, so Rosan had decided to leave him for last. Judging by how he looked currently, that was a good idea. This guy didn't even want to fight him anymore. He was backing away rapidly with tears running down his eyes. Clearly this isn't what he had signed up for. Rosan narrowed his eyes slightly and shook his head in disappointment. He felt kind of bad that he had reduced the man to this state, but another part felt rather disgusted that the pirate was crying so freely. Mama had always said big boys don't cry, and this man looked above 20. How could he feel no shame for what he was currently doing? Gross. Someone's mother didn't give him the memo. A smaller, unnoticeable part felt a vindictive glee at the effect he could have on people. Well, he wasn't gonna get anything fun out of this man. Best to put him out of his misery then. Lame. Running up to the man, currently crawling away, Rosan ignored his pleas and silenced him by chopping him in the throat. The pirate gagged and Rosan spun, getting behind the man, so he could punch him in the back of his head twice with crushing force. He fell over unceremoniously, knocked blissfully unconscious. Well, that was pretty easy, Rosan thought, blinking at how quickly they had fallen. It had a few exciting moments, but it would have been pretty boring if Rosan didn't enjoy beating them up so much. Fighting was really fun. Ma-chan really was a great teacher. He had only sustained 1 cut from that entire fight. She was amazing. Incredible. Fantastic. Oh, enough of that, Maud bashfully told him, her face progressively reddening the more words he said. The devil fruit was not used to being complimented so heavily, and as such, she had no good way of defending herself from them. Rosan grinned at the purple-haired woman before dusting himself off. Right then, that only left the captain for him to dispose of. He wondered what the man was going to do now that his whole crew was gone. He didn't look any stronger than the others, so Rosan wasn't really expecting much. The cocking of a gun shut off that train of thought rather quickly. Sometimes, Rosan wished he didn't have to open his mouth and so brazenly tempt fate. Ma-chan shared the same sentiment. Turn around, you freak. The now pistol-wielding captain demanded. Turning around slowly, Rosan rolled his eyes as Ma-chan smugly said, I told you, Rosan, always be prepared for anything. Weird time to be smug about something like this, Ma-chan. I could get shot, you know? Was his exasperated reply. The sheer smugness Ma-chan radiated didn't vanish at all. If anything, it magnified. She was taking after him far too well, and Rosan wasn't sure if he should be happy or worried about that. Who was he kidding? Acting like him was always a win. He was him after all. Wait, right, he was being held at gunpoint. He needed to focus. The man had gained a new wind of confidence at the advantageous position he was in. Bet you weren't expecting this, huh, you bastard? He boasted in victory. Take off your hoodie now. I want to know who was bold enough to attack the saber pirates, he demanded with false bravado. After a moment's pause, he looked around the ship and yelled, Robin, where the hell are you? Silence was the only thing that greeted him, and he looked visibly irritated at being ignored. No matter, he'd deal with her later. He didn't have any illusions at being able to beat the girl with an insane bounty, but to just abandon them was unbefitting of a saber pirate. Why is he talking to me? Rosan wondered curiously. Surely, he should just shoot me and be done with it, right? Some people have gigantic egos and would much rather talk than get the job done. Don't be like that, Rosan, Maud said with a shake of her head. Wow, this isn't the first time you've seen this. Maud shook her head no, and Rosan nearly laughed. People are really stupid. Yes, they are, Rosan. Yes, they are. The devil fruit quickly focused on the problem at hand and thought of what to do. Do as he says for now until an opening is available, Maud informed him, and Rosan internally hummed an affirmative. As expected, I'll be bailing you out, Maud confidently replied with a rather cheeky smile that she had picked up from the redhead himself. Rosan cursed his mistake. If he knew Ma-chan was going to get such an ego off of this, he would have been even more careful. Now, she was going to be insufferable, and he was going to be the target. You know me so well, she said fondly, and Rosan rolled his eyes again. Rosan purposely removed his hoodie slowly, just to aggravate the captain. He was easy to rile up, and the redhead was pretty good at annoying people. Daichi gained a vein of annoyance on his face as he was greeted by a simple white mask, 2 purple glowing iris, and a shock of red hair. He could practically feel the smugness radiating off the freak, and that pissed him off to no end. You think you're so funny, huh? He snarled. I'm Daichi of the Saber Pirates, and your games end here. I can blow your brains out in seconds, so you better stop acting all high and mighty. Take off your mask now, he demanded. He bristled as the only thing that greeted him was pure silence. The captain of the Saber Pirates felt his foul mood mounting. This thing had attacked them unprovoked, taken out all of his crew members, including his best friend, and now he was teasing him even after having a gun pointed at him. Bullshit. Say something, you fucker. Daichi bellowed, finally losing his temper as the stress of today's events finally caught up to him. Such foul language. Maud sniffed, and Rosan nearly laughed at how genuinely bothered she seemed. Moving his gloved hand to his face, Rosan began removing his mask at an agonizingly slow pace, much to the fury of the man, if the way he was trembling was indication. Teasing the man was pretty funny, and, despite the situation, Rosan wasn't worried at all. He had Ma-chan after all. Right before he fully removed his mask, Rosan smiled in mischief. Daichi had asked him to speak after all. The redhead cleared his throat to catch the man's attention, and Daichi couldn't help but lean forward in anticipation to catch his voice. Rosan's smile turned into a full-blown grin that Daichi, of course, didn't see. Modify. Shrink, Rosan said in clear amusement before he vanished from the captain's sight. Rosan laughed in malicious glee as he shrunk. The look on Daichi's face was utterly priceless. His jaw had dropped as Rosan practically vanished from sight before the man let out a string of curses and began unloading his chamber in a renewed fury. The redhead would cherish the sheer rage on the captain's face at being fooled for a long time. Daichi must have thought Rosan had camouflaged again and was hoping to get a lucky shot. It was a good idea. Invisible didn't mean intangible after all. Unfortunately, this wasn't invisibility. Rosan had modified his size, and shrunk himself to nearly microscopic to fool the man. The redhead knew what his thought process was going to be when he vanished from his sight again. He's invisible again. Rosan took full advantage of that. It had worked out well, and he made the man look like an idiot. Rosan absolutely loved modification. Already 4 and playing mind games? What a scary child, Maud said with a bright blush on her face. Closing his eyes, like he had promised, Rosan let Maud-chan take control. A blush dusted over the youth's face as Maud took control and his eyes turned a blood red. The purple-haired woman needed to get used to Rosan's sincere compliments of her. They were too good at catching her off guard. Shaking her head, Maud decided to focus on the task at hand. Quickly maneuvering the possessed boy's body, Maud ran up to Daichi. The man had completely lost it and was just shooting in every single direction. How sad. He had become a complete lunatic in his fury and had no regards for anything. Some shots were even hitting his unconscious crewmates. How ruthless. It was up to her to put this animal down. Reaching him, Maud quickly got behind him and jumped. Modify. Revert, she intoned. Rosan's microscopic body grew instantly into his normal form, and she reached out to grab at his head, blood-red eyes glowing bright. Daichi whirled around, but it was too late. The only thing that greeted him were 2 red irises glowing sinisterly behind that white mask. As he felt a hand grasp his head, Daichi shook in a primal fear. Since attacking their ship, this thing had not struggled even once. This wasn't a normal person. This was a monster. Wait please. He tried, but the figure refused to listen.
Modification, jam.
Were the last things he heard before his world went blank. Rosan grunted as he threw Daichi over the ship. That had been the last person to go, and Rosan didn't even bother to watch after he threw them over. Wiping the sweat off his forehead, Rosan marveled at how well he had done. You're pretty incredible, Maud-chan. What was that last move you did on Daichi, though? Rosan wondered. Maud just touched him and he blanked out. What was it called again?
Jam?
Rosan wanted to learn it. It could be really cool. I jammed his brain. He saw the color of your hair, so, on the off chance he lives, I disabled his brain so he won't be able to tell anyone a single detail about you. Or anything else for that matter, Maud replied as if she were discussing the weather. Hey, isn't that kinda really scary? You shouldn't say that in such a nonchalant tone, Maud-chan, Rosan said with a sweat drop. Maud-chan was actually pretty terrifying when she wanted to be. The devil fruit was capable of doing some scary things without seeming fazed whatsoever. Rosan was thankful that she spoiled him rotten. Rosan suddenly recalled something said in the battle and frowned. Maud-chan, there might be someone else on the ship. Maud nodded proudly at his statement. Well done on noticing that, Rosan, she praised. Based on what Daichi said, someone named Robin is likely on this ship. It's possible that he was lying since no one answered him, but it's best to proceed with caution. Rosan agreed. Crouching slightly, the 4-year-old touched the surface of the ship. Modification. Scan dash? Wait just a moment, please, a voice interrupted the redhead. I believe you were looking for me? A childlike voice said, and Rosan paused what he was doing. Looking up, Rosan tilted his head as a kid who looked a few years older than him appeared. She wasn't very tall, though that still made her taller than him, with a darker tan that was lighter than Rosan's own. Shoulder-length black hair and blue eyes with dark wide pupils. She also had a long, thin, and defined nose. She wore a simple black dress that stopped above her knees and matching black flops. She looked incredibly weary and, despite trying to appear as non-threatening as possible, she had her guard up. Rosan blinked in confusion at what he was looking at. This was definitely not what he'd been expecting. Someone around his age? Sailing the sea? The boy wondered what her circumstances were for her to be with such a crew like the Saber Pirates. The boy shuddered as he felt a spike of rage from Maud-chan. Was she okay? What had caused her to get so angry? Robin, seeing that she hadn't been attacked yet, hesitantly continued with her plan. I'd appreciate it if you didn't throw me overboard. I can't swim, she requested politely. The figure continued starting at her with its head tilted. They did not indicate having even heard her question. Robin was starting to think this was a bad idea. The girl really didn't have much choice, though. It was either that or risk fighting this person. She was pretty sure they were a human from what little of their appearance she had seen. If that idiot Daichi hadn't blown her cover, she could have waited and seen just what the figure before her wanted. But instead, she was forced her to alter her plans. Robin doubted they were here for her, but that didn't make her situation any less worse. She was lucky that they didn't attack her immediately and took that as a sign that they was at least willing to hear her out. It would suck if the brunette blew her cover for no reason. She could have just stayed hidden and used her devil fruit, but based on what she saw, if they landed one touch on her, it was game over. Robin had no clue how a fight between the two of them would turn out, but she didn't want to chance it. Like she established, if they touched her, she was going to end up exactly like the rest of the crew. The Hana Nomi user shuddered as she recalled the glowing red where his eyes would be and a lifeless Daichi falling over. At least the red glow was gone, replaced instead by a dim, glowing purple. She had to hope that it would be possible to negotiate with them. Glancing nervously around, she was only greeted with the sound of waves. There was no island in sight, and the figure had already thrown the rest of the crew overboard. "You're Robin?" they suddenly asked with their head tilted in an oddly cute display. Robin started at how suddenly they spoke. The mask they had on muffled their voice enough that she couldn't quite tell what gender they were. Remembering that he asked her a question, Robin hastily confirmed by saying, "Yes, I'm Nico Robin." After a moment's pause, she couldn't help but ask, "You haven't heard about me? Am I supposed to know you?" was their confused response, head still tilted as they looked her up and down. Robin was shocked. After all, it wasn't every day that someone didn't recognize the devil child. If they really weren't aware of who she was, that definitely ruled out the possibility that he was here for her. That doesn't make any sense, though. Robin contemplated, deep in thought. No one on this ship, barring her, had any relevance at all. They were an upstart group, and they hadn't even truly begun pirating. They didn't even have any bounties. Surely they had a reason for attacking this ship in particular? She hadn't heard of news of any ships getting attacked by a mini black-clad figure. Unless they had recently started, this was likely their first target. So that begged the question, why did you attack them? Why aren't you attacking me? Robin asked them. She was curious on who this person was and what they wanted. She nearly regretted asking the questions as they just kept staring at her. It was unnerving. The masked figure didn't answer her question. Instead, they opted to ask her, "How old are you? Did those pirates do anything to you?" Robin contemplated lying, but decided against it. "I'm 8 years old and know they didn't do anything. They are afraid of me, but thank you for your concern," she replied politely, though inside she was even more confused. You don't just brutalize an entire ship 1 second and ask a question like that. Maybe he knew this crew personally if he was asking a question like that. That would explain his unprovoked attack. Yeah, that must be it. Nodding to themselves at her answer, she needed a name for this person, finally answered her question. "I wanted a ship, and you asked me not to throw you overboard." The idiot went unsaid, but Robin still heard it. Resisting the sudden urge to choke them, Robin took a deep breath to try and stave off her annoyance. She quickly got it back under control before realizing what he had said. She nearly gaped in disbelief. "You attacked the people on this ship because you wanted it?" She managed to choke out. He nodded, like brutalizing an entire crew for a ship was a perfectly normal thing to do. Robin was sure that whoever was under that mask was not right in the head. She was on a ship with someone who was probably insane. That didn't bode well for the 8-year-old. Just great. Maybe she should have just stayed hidden. Rosan, for his part, wasn't quite expecting this interaction. Robin was young, much younger than he was expecting. While she was still older than him, his circumstances weren't exactly normal, and he deduced that hers probably weren't either. The other members were grown men, so Rosan didn't really mind throwing them overboard. Mama told him to always treat girls with respect unless they disrespected him first, though, and she hadn't disrespected him. Since she was so nice to him, Rosan didn't really want to throw her overboard. She also couldn't swim, so she would definitely die. Madchan had been silent since she had first laid eyes upon the girl. Rosan could tell that she wasn't happy whatsoever, and it worried him. Ask her how old she is and if those men did anything to her. Rosan easily complied with her request and asked the girl, who responded accordingly. So she was 4 years older than him. Rosan hummed to himself as he digested, and Madchan let out a sigh of relief when Robin had said that they hadn't touched her. Still, she must have been pretty important if she expected people to notice her at a glance. Rosan contemplated just what he was going to do with her. The child didn't want to have to throw her overboard and, because of him, Madchan had a soft spot for children. She probably wouldn't want to do it either, especially unprovoked, and the redhead didn't want to force her to. She had seen his hair though, and Madchan had been adamant on not showing anyone his spiky red hair. It was too unique and stood out, was her response when he asked why. It would not be hard for people to distinguish him from it. So now, the redhead was in a predicament. He was set on not throwing her off his newly acquired ship, and Madchan was in agreement with him. He asked if she could wipe her memories, and Madchan said she didn't currently have the control to safely wipe it. If she did it, she'd most likely turn into a vegetable. Still staring, Rosan watched as she fidgeted in discomfort. The boy couldn't help the concern welling up inside of him as he looked at her. Her entire demeanor bothered him. She looked so scarred. She looked lonely. He couldn't stand that. It reminded him of himself. We should trust her, Madchan, Rosan thought to his devil fruit. What makes you think she's trustworthy? Maud knew once Rosan made up his mind about something, it was nearly impossible to change it. But she still wanted to understand from his mouth what he was thinking. It also helped that she wasn't adverse against the idea in the first place. She just had to be wary for the both of them. She looks so tired, Madchan. Rosan began, and his voice was filled with sympathy. She's only 4 years older than me, but she looks like she's been through so much already, and, unlike me, I don't think she's lucky enough to have someone like you to rely on, so I want to be the one she can rely on. Everyone deserves at least one friend. We know better than anyone that nobody should ever feel alone, and that's why we're friends. Rosan exclaimed passionately to his guardian. Maud's heart swelled at the speech Rosan just gave her. Honestly, he was such a sweetheart sometimes, and it warmed her to the core. The 4-year-old was one of a kind, and she loved him for that. He was also getting really good at giving speeches. Voice fond, Maud said, "All right, Rosan, I have no objections. If she agrees to travel with us, I will gladly accept her." Rosan cheered internally as he heard her approval. He knew Madchan would support him. She always tried to put up a tough front, but she was secretly a real sweetheart. The 4-year-old expertly ignored the feeling of being glared at by his devil fruit and instead focused on the visibly agitated Robin. The girl looked like she was preparing for a fight. Rosan wondered how strong No. Bad Rosan. No trying to fight someone you're about to invite onto your almost awesome, but not yet, ship. "Hey, Robin," he said suddenly, and watched as she lightly jumped at the sudden call of her name. Rosan winced at that. He didn't mean to put her on edge so much. It made him feel even more compelled to befriend her because the girl had serious trust issues. Remembering he was still clad in his sneaking around outfit, Rosan slowly took his mask off, showing off all his features to his fellow child. Finally unmasked Rosan, asked, "Do you want to be my friend and travel with me?" Robin's eyes widened as the figure reached up and removed their mask. Crimson hair spiked down messily, as a dangerously young face gazed at her with shining, royal purple eyes. Robin had not expected the mysterious attacker to be so young, and her open-mouthed surprise was testament to this. Just how old were they? Were they by themselves? Where were his parents? Was he the same as her? She assumed that they were a boy. Though, he did look a tad bit girly. Height made much more sense now. Finding the ability to speak again, it was Robin's turn to ask in a dumbfounded tone, "Who are you? How old are you?" Maybe he was just cursed with permanent youth? A birth defect that made him unable to grow? A devil fruit ability most likely? All her doubts were wiped away as he blinked at her sudden question and replied, "I'm Portgas D. Rosa, nice to meet ya. I'm 4. As if it was no big deal at all. Robin was sure anyone else in her shoes would have fainted at the sheer insanity that had occurred today, but she had a reputation to upkeep. He was 4? What type of 4-year-old attacks a bunch of adults just for the sake of taking their ship? Was he completely insane? He could have gotten hurt. He had got us scratched with a knife. What 4-year-old shrugs off a knife cut? Wait, did he say his name was Portgas D. Rosan? This boy had a D in his name? This made him even more interesting in her eyes. But what was it with people who had the D initial, just doing whatever they pleased? Surely not every one of them acted like this 4-year-old, right? No, she had to have been dreaming. The events of today were just some freak fever dream, she tried convincing herself. To further prove her point, Robin pinched herself hard. Rosan's gaze turned worried as Robin pinched herself and let out a tiny yelp of pain. Was she okay? Why did she just pinch herself? Oh, maybe she was one of the weirdos Mama had warned him about. Maybe he had made a mistake? Rosan, she's not a weirdo, it's just, you. I don't blame her for pinching herself. Gee, thanks Ma-chan. How did you possibly take that as a compliment? It's not. No, it is Rosan. Robin flushed as she saw the child still staring at her. Right, it wasn't a dream. This was real. Very real. Fantastic. Robin waved off his questioning gaze, saying she was fine, and felt a burst of annoyance at how he looked at her. The child was practically calling her stupid with just his purple gaze alone, and Robin didn't think a child could successfully annoy her. She struggled to keep the cool facade on, but eventually the girl managed to get it under control. Suddenly remembering that he had asked her a question, Robin felt her gaze widen as she fully registered what he had asked. Did you just ask to be my friend? He nodded in confirmation, a toothy grin on his face. And you want me to travel with you? She asked in confusion. Another cheerful nod, this time more enthusiastic than the first. Robin resisted the urge to pinch herself again. Was it possible for a 4-year-old to be insane? Rosan had just brutalized an entire crew by himself, with only a scratch to show for it, and now he was looking at her with those adorably large, shining eyes, practically begging her to accept his proposition with his gaze alone. Yep, definitely insane. Robin wasn't really in a position to refuse. She didn't really fancy her chances against the ocean, which he was sure she'd end up in, if she said no. The redhead had attacked them disguised, and he seemed adamant on hiding his appearance. The 8-year-old had managed to see his entire face, and she knew that was not a good thing. She at least wanted to know why on earth he wanted to travel with her. The brunette asked as much out loud, and his head tilted in the way he seemed to instinctively do when he was thinking. She had to admit, it was pretty dang cute. She wouldn't say it out loud, though. I think it'll be pretty fun if we travel together, he said cheerfully. There was a pregnant pause after that, and, at her incredulous gaze, his face became more serious. The child's purple eyes turned downcast, and he somberly said, I don't know you really well, but I know that look in your eyes. You look like you lost something really important to you. Robin's eyes nearly widened at that, but she carefully masked it behind a neutral expression. Unimpeded, Rosan continued softly, I know how it feels to have everything taken from you. It sucks. It's the worst feeling I've ever felt in my life, and it must have been the same way with you. The boy's voice turned a bit watery as he spoke, and Robin knew he was telling the truth. The sadness is so much that it makes you want to crawl somewhere and just sleep it away. The loneliness is so crushing it just makes you want to give up. Rosan looked up at her, royal purple locking onto sky blue, and said, You look really lonely, Robin. Robin's mask threatened to crack under the sheer intensity of his gaze. The 8-year-old felt so small, so exposed at the way Rosan nailed all her insecurities with just a glance. Nobody had managed to do that in her time traveling. Just who was this boy? To know so much about what was going on in her mind at a glance. It was rather terrifying. More than that, the red-headed child had said he understood how she felt. What happened to him for him to relate to how she was feeling? Was that why a 4-year-old was sailing the seas alone? Sympathy ran through her as that thought wormed its way into her head. Rosan was far too young to be forced into a position where he had to sail the seas alone. Though she was only 8, she had already been mostly independent back on O'Hara. The loneliness of having no one didn't affect her as badly because for most of her life she had no one. She couldn't say the same for the 4-year-old boy standing before her. Don't you know who I am? They call me the Devil Child, Nico Robin. I have a bounty of 79 million berries. You don't want to be friends with someone like me, she said in hopes of scaring him off. Nobody would willingly want to be friends with her after hearing who she was. This was how it always turned out. It would just put a giant target on their back. Rosan, for his part, just stared at her. Slamming a fist into his palm, he said, "Oh, that's why you were surprised I didn't recognize you." And he laughed at the revelation. "What did you do to get a bounty so high?" the redhead asked in curious excitement. Robin was a bit put off at his lack of fear at the revelation. She didn't let that deter her, however. "I sunk 6 battleships," was her confident reply. Rosan narrowed his eyes at her. "No, you didn't. Don't lie to me. I don't like when people lie," he said bluntly, and the boy scowled at her. Robin deflated a bit at his matter-of-fact tone. Nobody ever doubted that claim before because, since the world government said it, it must have been true. Rosan didn't believe her for even 1 second. He could immediately sense that she was lying, and that would do no good. The redhead was not fond of people lying to him. Not even his mother could get away with it. Defeated, Robin simply asked him, "Well, why do you want to be friends with me?" Determined eyes looked into her, and Robin felt as if he could see right through her. It was scary to be dissected so easily at just a gaze. "Nobody should ever be forced to be alone," Rosan eventually said with sad eyes. "You look exhausted, Robin. You've probably never had anyone to rely on, and that's not fair. I want to be your friend so that you can rely on me. I'll protect you when you get in trouble, and you'll protect me when I get in trouble." He finished with a hopeful grin on his face. Robin felt something unfamiliar stir inside her at how sincere Rosan sounded. She wanted to dismiss his words as nothing but lies, but looking into his earnest gaze formed a lump in her throat that she couldn't quite get rid of. He really wanted to be her friend? She hadn't had a friend since Saul, and because of her, he was... Robin shook those thoughts away hastily and looked back at Rosan, the lump feeling heavier. She wanted to believe he was lying, but she really couldn't looking into those eyes of his. How could he be lying with all the interactions they currently had? Based on what he was doing, all facts pointed to him being honest with her. He had been protecting his identity, to the point where only the glow of his eyes were visible behind his guise, but he so willingly showed her his face. He invited her to the ship without even knowing her identity. When he did find out, nothing about his demeanor changed at all. Rosan had even told her his name, and the D part had caused her eyes to widen in recognition. He had the same middle initial as Saul. Just what did it mean? They didn't look even remotely related, and he didn't make it seem like the D stood for anything. She knew there was something about that initial, and for Rosan to disclose his full name to someone he just met either meant he was really dumb, or he really did want them to trust each other. Rosan, as much she wanted to deny it, only had her best interests at heart, which left her stumped. No one ever had her best interests at heart. That's why Robin was finding it so hard to believe that this wasn't a ploy to turn her into the Marines. But, just from how he spoke, from how optimistic he was about everything, she couldn't bring herself to believe that the 4-year-old could plan something so underhanded. No, Robin had gotten good at picking up on people who wanted to use her, and Rosan wasn't one of them. The little monster had taken out an entire crew by himself. He didn't need her. If anything, she'd benefit more from using him than vice versa. He was being completely genuine, and that shook her to the core. They had only just met. Why did he suddenly care so much about her? He wasn't normal, but maybe his crazy was a good kind of crazy? Hesitantly, Robin started heavily considering his proposition. Maybe deep down, she really did just want a friend. Or maybe his insanity was contagious and she had fallen victim to it already. That second option really does seem likely, Robin mused. She began to feel oddly protective at the thought that he was traveling such dangerous waters by himself. Despite everything she had seen, the child looked so innocent, so vulnerable, so tiny. He really shouldn't be traveling by himself. Something bad could happen to him. At the very least, he should have someone to watch his back. Maud snorted sympathetically. The poor girl had already fallen to Rosan's charm. Welcome to the club, she thought to herself. Robin tried to make it seem like she was contemplating still, but truthfully, her mind had already been made up the moment she heard Rosan's speech. The boy had long since won her over, and she was just playing it up for theatrics at this point. Latching onto the last part of the boy's speech, the Hannah Nomi user mirthfully said, "Something tells me I'll be doing a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to protecting each other." Rosan's grin widened in excitement at her acceptance, and Robin noted that he had particularly sharp fangs. Said grin quickly turned into confusion, then protest. Hey, we haven't even known each other for long. How can you already tell that I'm reckless? He said, admitting it without meaning to. The boy immediately recognized his mistake and hung his head in defeat. Robin couldn't help the giggle that escaped her at the child's antics. He was pretty funny. Unbeknownst to her, Maud-chan joined her in laughing at the boy. Maud decided that she would like this girl just fine. Rosan began regretting his decision. If Maud-chan and Robin got along then, wouldn't that mean they'd start bullying him? He didn't like the sound of that. He really didn't like the sound of that. Bully? Me? I would never, Maud said cheerfully, and Rosan shuddered at her tone. Maybe he shouldn't have done this. Robin was convinced that traveling with Rosan was gonna give her more headaches than was worth. Why? Because he was insane, of course. The 4-year-old's entire demeanor screamed chaotic. It's not like it was intentional either. It was just in his nature to do things that made him happy, and they happened to be very peculiar. He was a boy that did what he wanted to do, and he did that with scary effectiveness. Things had started off normal enough. Rosan had gotten cut from his altercation with the, now defunct, Saber Pirates, and it caused him slight discomfort. It was a long, but shallow cut, so it wasn't anything too threatening. Robin offered to patch up the already healing cut, which was much healing faster than she expected. Rosan happily accepted her aid with a beaming grin on his bronze face. Leading him to the medical room, Robin found a medical gauze and got to work on patching his cut up. Robin noted that he was a natural bronze as she patched him up. Robin doubted 4-year-old's new tanning techniques, and she knew for a fact Rosan didn't care about that. Coupled with his too bright, purple eyes and his spiky red hair that was surprisingly soft, the brunette could see why he was so intent on hiding his appearance. It was remarkably unique. If he became well known, it would be easy to spot him. Rosan hummed a happy tune as Robin worked, and the 8-year-old idly bobbed her head to the sound. He has a nice voice, Robin thought idly to herself. Did his parents used to sing to him? As she finished wrapping his cut up, Robin signaled that she was done, and Rosan got up, marveling at her handiwork. Thanks, Robin. You're the best. The purple-eyed boy beamed at her. Robin. Testing it on her tongue slowly, Robin found that she quite liked it. Smiling bashfully at Rosan, she said, It's no problem, Rosan. Afterwards, Rosan had scurried back to the main deck. The boy looked like he wanted to do something, so Robin followed after him, full of curiosity. As they both made it back outside, Rosan glanced around, nodding to himself, still humming all the while. Robin watched in confusion as Rosan crouched down and palmed the floor. Modify, he muttered. Robin's confusion turned into shock as the entire ship began to shake. The 8-year-old fell on her, but as the rumbling of the caravel removed her balance, Robin's eyes widened as the entire ship transformed. It became slimmer and sleek. The brown shade of the caravel had turned a striking black with white rose patterns decorating the side. Unseen to Robin, the interior of the ship had changed too. Rosan had changed it so that, similarly to his old dinghy, it would be able to move on its own without the boy needing to manually do anything. What? He was only 4 years old after all. Couldn't expect him to operate the ship by himself just yet, or ever with the changes. You will still be learning how to operate one, just in case, Maud chimed in, and Rosan nodded in affirmation. The Mod Nomi user made the ship a bit smaller for speed and for easier uses of modification in the future. This wasn't going to be the last time he modified this ship, he was sure of that. The boy was always seeking improvement, and that applied to the things surrounding him as well. He found that modifying something that had already been modified by him made it much easier to change again. When he first modified something, it left him drained depending on the scale of what he was doing. Case in point, Rosan panted in exhaustion after finishing his latest task. He nearly fell over, but managed to catch himself at the last second. That was the first time he had modified something so large, and he didn't even need Maud-chan to help him. Her lessons were paying off nicely, and Rosan was glad ships were the first thing she taught him about. The redhead was utterly exhausted from the taxing ability, though. He was really hungry, now that he thought about it. He hoped Robin knew how to cook. Maud-chan could do a lot of things. But, She was absolutely horrible at cooking, and the less said about Rosan's cooking, for now, the better. Maud flushed at that. It wasn't her fault. The devil fruit had never needed to cook before, so it was natural she wouldn't know how to cook. Still, you don't have to be so rude about it, Rosan. She pouted, and Rosan sheepishly apologized to her. They both suddenly heard. Turning towards a wide-eyed Robin, she asked, "W, did you just do?" Rosan tried to answer but moaned, "Food," instead. The poor boy looked ready to keel over, and his face was morphed into pain. Taking pity on the pathetic display, Robin shook her head in exasperation and walked over to him. Robin helped him up, he was light, and slung his tiny arm over her shoulder. Walking towards the kitchen, Robin rolled her eyes. He was lucky she knew how to cook. Rosan let out a satisfied sigh as he finished eating the sandwiches Robin made for him. "You really know how to cook, Robin. Without you, who knows what I'd have made?" Rosan grinned thankfully at her. Robin blushed bashfully at his praise and said, "It's nothing. I'm no master chef, but I'm used to cooking for myself. I learned how to make a decent meal out of having to do so." Rosan nodded in understanding with a look of content on his face. Robin, seeing that this was as good as time as any, decided it was the perfect time to start grilling Rosan. Rosan, seeing him glance questioningly at her, Robin continued, "You have a devil fruit, right? Would you mind telling me what it is?" She asked hopefully. To give him further incentive, she hastily added on, "I can show you mine too." Rosan's eyes widened at the revelation, and the boy asked, "You have a devil fruit too?" At her confirmation, Rosan let a marveled noise escape him. "What is it? Show me," he practically demanded as his purple eyes shone in curiosity. Robin wasn't even surprised at this point about the boy completely disregarding her question. Crossing her arms together, she summoned a single arm on Rosan's shoulder and began pinching him on his cheek. That would teach him to not be so rude. To her surprise, though, Rosan didn't scream like she expected. Instead, he let out an excited squeal and began messing with the sprouted arm. Robin gasped as the boy shook her hand and then prodded and poked it. The sensation transferred back to her, and the brunette hastily dissolved the arm. She sprouted two more and began to tickle Rosan in revenge. The effects were immediate. Rosan let out a yelp of surprise and fell over. She momentarily paused what she was doing until she realized the boy was laughing. Wait. Rosan begged in between fits of laughter. "Stop, why does everyone always tickle me? Ftka." He failed to finish his sentence as he began to helplessly laugh from the torture. Robin burst into laughter. She couldn't help it. Rosan's laughter was just too contagious. She giggled mirthfully at the hilarity of it all. Unable to maintain her fruit anymore, Robin collapsed in a fit of laughter, releasing Rosan. Finally free from her evil clutches, Rosan, still laughing, launched himself at her and decided to give her a taste of her own medicine. Robin squealed as Rosan mercilessly tickled her. Finally, a person he could get revenge on. Mama had been unbeatable, boasting a perfect record against the young boy, but Robin was fair game. Rosan maliciously took advantage of this fact and tickled Robin like his life depended on it. The girl pleaded for him to stop in between laughter, but Rosan would have his vengeance. Madchan smiled fondly all the while. It was good that Rosan had a friend around his age, and, based on what she had heard, it was good for Robin too. The two deserved a little bit of companionship. "So your devil fruit is called the Hana Hana no Mi, and it lets you sprout pieces of your body? That's so cool." After their tickle war, a smug Rosan sat on one of the stools, Robin opposite to him, and finally got back on topic. The redhead had made sure to gloat his victory endlessly after Robin had chosen to wave the white flag, though. Robin's half-hearted glare was quickly wiped away in favor of a blush at his unexpected praise. "You think it's cool?" At Rosan's enthusiastic nod, Robin smiled. That was the second time someone complimented her devil fruit, and it felt just as nice as the first time. Robin listened to Rosan ramble about ways she could use her fruit, and while some were interesting, others were rather silly. Really, a giant version of her made solely from her feet. She would note some of them for later. But first, "Rosan, you never told me what your devil fruit was." Robin interrupted. Crossing her arms, she fixed Rosan with a heavy stare. She knew now that it was just Rosan being Rosan and that the boy was prone to move from topic to topic quickly, but she wouldn't let him do it this time. He just needed someone to firmly keep him on track. Rosan blinked before a guilty expression overcame his features. She did ask him what his devil fruit was, didn't she? Instead of answering her, though, he had been rude instead, not answering her at all. He really needed to stop changing the topic so much. Mama had said that it was a bad habit of his, and that was why people didn't really like talking to him much. Rosan contemplated on how to best tell her what his devil fruit was. He didn't have a problem telling her. On the contrary, Rosan was very eager to tell her about the Mod no Mi. His fruit was just as cool as hers. No, it was even cooler. But he needed to prove that it was cooler. Rosan rubbed his chin as he thought on how best to approach this. Rosan, is this really necessary? You can merely tell her what it is. I'm not really seeing the big deal about it. Rosan dismissed her suggestion immediately. You don't get it, Mod-chan. I need to let Robin know just how cool you are. Wait a minute, I got it. Inspiration struck Rosan as his eyes sparkled. I can just have her meet you. Rosan quickly checked with Mod-chan to see if his new plan was possible. Ivy never really thought about doing that, but you can try it. I can make sure that nothing goes wrong. Eyes glowing in excitement, Rosan practically warped in Robin's personal space and grabbed her hand. Robin, do you trust me? The bronze boy asked as purple eyes blatantly pleaded for her to say yes. Robin felt a sweat drop form as she reluctantly said, Yes, Rosan, I trust you. The boy was so pushy sometimes. Even if she wanted to say no, the impending heartbreak on his face would have instantly shattered her resolve. Something told her she was going to regret this decision, but it was hard to say no to Rosan. He was lucky that she actually did trust him. He was so genuine and honest when talking to her. It was such an unfamiliar feeling, and Robin found that she liked being treated like an actual person. How could she not trust him? Being insane and compelling was not a combination Robin wanted to run into again. Rosan cheered in glee, making her smile, and quickly made the brunette shut her eyes. Tiny palms connected to her equally small ones, and Robin started a bit. She had noticed earlier, during their tickle war, but it was even more apparent now. Rosan radiated a lot of warmth. It was very comforting, and the heat helped calm Robin down immensely. Rosan began speaking, and Robin focused on his voice, palms still connected. Modification link. He began, and Robin noted that all the time she heard him use his ability, he either said modification or modify. Was modification the name of his ability? Users Robin, Rosan. Robin was a bit concerned when a slight buzzing noise suddenly appeared in the back of her head. That concern quickly morphed into shock as the sudden feeling of moving despite being completely still washed over her. She was tempted to open her eyes, but against her, probably better, judgment she decided to fully trust Rosan and kept her eyes closed. The feeling of being moved only got more intense, and Robin gasped at the incredibly strange sensation. What was Rosan doing? Was she okay? Well, there was no use backing out now that she was in this deep. The Hana no Mi user decided to stop resisting the pull and let herself go. Robin promptly blacked out. When Robin opened her eyes again, she was greeted by two sets of eyes. One was the large, worried, purple gaze that she quickly identified as Rosan. The other was a pair of glowing crimson eyes that stared at her with a neutral expression. Robin contemplated getting up, but the grass she was resting on felt rather pleasant. It wasn't often that she got to truly relax, and she decided not to take it for granted. Maybe traveling with Rosan wasn't so bad of an idea after all. Wait, grass? That wasn't right at all. Robin shot up with wide eyes, glancing around wildly. This wasn't the ship. Where was she? How long had she been sleeping for? Whirling onto Rosan, she watched as the boy flinched and asked him as much. Holding his arms in a placating gesture did nothing for her nerves, and the boy soothingly said, Robin, calm down. You just woke up. You shouldn't be so alarmed. She reluctantly agreed that he raised a good point. Taking a deep breath, Robin calmed down just a little and glared coldly at Rosan. When you asked me to trust you, she began with a hard stare. I didn't expect you to kidnap me. She had trusted the boy, and this was what that got her? This is why she never let her guard down around people. No matter how pure their intentions seemed, it was probably a lie. Rosan must have been a master of emotional manipulation because the hurt in his eyes at her accusation made the girl falter. Waving his arms wildly, Rosan said, "Wait, we're still on the ship. I would never kidnap you, Robin, nay." Robin shot him an unimpressed look as she glanced around and said, "This sure doesn't look like a ship, Rosan." Looking at the purple-haired woman, she added distrustfully, "And who's your friend? Is she the one who set this up? Your mom?" The two looked somewhat similar. This woman was a slightly lighter shade than Rosan, with a pretty heart-shaped face, enhanced by her sharp features, a button nose, and plump lips. She had long, royal purple hair that was a similar shade as Rosan's eyes and blood-red eyes that were a similar shade to Rosan's hair. Honestly, Robin would be hard-pressed to find someone as pretty as her. She looked like royalty and, coupled with the long black dress, that may not have been far from the truth. The woman in question just looked at her with a blank expression on those gorgeous features. She didn't say anything, and the stranger was just assessing her with those oddly familiar red eyes. Ah, she was an ice queen then. Just let me explain, Robin. Rosan pleaded, and Robin sighed, loosening her rigid stance. Rosan, based on the look in his eyes, hadn't meant to give her a scare. The little boy looked guilty at the fact that he had managed to cause her such anxiety, and watching his regret helped to lessen the anger she was feeling. "I'm not angry at you anymore, Rosan. But a bit more of a warning besides close your eyes would be really nice," she said. Exasperated, she gestured for him to explain just what was going on, and he nodded thankfully at her for forgiving him. It couldn't have been that bad after all. It could definitely be that bad, and the brunette sorely regretted tempting fate. Never again. She would leave fate out of this because it seemed to have a terrible sense of humor. Robin wasn't sure if her head spinning was because of the fact she was still dizzy or because of the sheer insanity of what Rosan had just told her. At this point, she was sure it was both of the options. Turns out, they actually were still on the ship. The surprise on Robin's face at seeing her unconscious body on the deck was surely a moment she'd look back at in the future and laugh at. But right now, all she could settle for was letting out a strangled gasp as disbelief seeped into her. She was informed that they were located in Rosan's mindscape, a mental representation of the boy himself. Looking at the bright tropical forest, Robin definitely agreed that it was an accurate representation of the sunny redhead standing before her. That had brought them to the next point that made any of this even possible. Rosan's devil fruit, the Mod no Mi and modification herself. When Robin had learned that the red-eyed woman standing next to Rosan was his devil fruit, she almost laughed. Instead, she fixed him with an unimpressed look. Surely, this was a prank of some kind that Rosan had been planning for who knows how long. But no, she actually was his devil fruit. Not only did Rosan seemingly have the first conscious devil fruit, she was the normal one of the two. Modchan, as Rosan affectionately called her, had taken over on the explanation in Rosan's stead. Rosan's plan had been to link the two of them together. He had taken inspiration from linking with his inanimate objects and decided to link to an actual person instead. Was it potentially dangerous? Maybe, but all the good stuff had dangers behind them. Learning about the capabilities of modification made Robin completely understand why it was imperative that Rosan kept this fruit a secret. It was dangerous. Dangerous enough to make a 4-year-old stronger than fully grown adults. Weak adults, but still adults. It was no surprise at all that the world government wanted it in their clutches. Despite everything, this had only strengthened her trust in Rosan. She felt flattered that he would share such an important secret with her, and it made the thought of him wanting to be her friend so much more believable. Robin was surprised he put so much faith in her, but she wouldn't let him down. Glancing around at the spacious forest, Robin had to admit that modification was capable of doing incredible things. Rosan told her that he had linked their minds together so that he could drag her into his mindscape. That sounded incredibly advanced and potentially dangerous. Did that mean Rosan could control people to some degree? It's not like he had to ask her for permission. If the boy wanted to, he could have just forcefully linked them together. Robin shuddered at the seemingly innocent technique. If Rosan ever used it maliciously, it would be terrifying to go against. Maud had reassured her that she scolded the child properly. Robin had promptly scolded him afterwards after learning that was his first time doing it. The boy glumly accepted it, but he was forgiven quickly. It was pretty adorable to watch him puff his cheeks out. The 8-year-old was glad Rosan had someone as reliable as Maud watching his back. The purple-haired woman was Rosan's guardian, and she took that job very seriously. Robin had been a little intimidated by the stony gaze of the women, but Rosan himself had broken that facade with just a few choice compliments. It was funny to see her pretty face adopt an atomic blush as she began stuttering. The Hana no Mi user was relieved, in a strange sort of way, that she wasn't the only one in use to getting complimented and falling victim to Rosan's charm. She was actually much nicer than she let on. Unlike Rosan, she was reserved and polite, and Robin quite liked her. Maud stated that she had already taken a liking to Robin as well, which is why she had approved the redhead's idea of traveling together. They also both loved messing with Rosan, so that was a bonus. The boy protested loudly at the unfair treatment already and puffed his cheeks out in anger. They were currently inside of a hot pink house. The interior of the house looked as if someone had been steadily working on it. Some parts were bare, left untouched by who she suspected to be Rosan, and others were decorated. This room in particular seemed like it had already been completed. The area resembled a lounge with white walls. On the walls were various pieces of art, but the ones that stuck out the most to her were a poster of a gigantic, black and red, fire-breathing dragon, along with another that had a beautiful woman with pink blonde hair and freckles. The floor was blanketed with a black wool carpet with leather chairs on top of them. There was also a large potted plant in the corner that seemed to grow fruits. How did that work? They each sat on one of the leather chairs as they got to know more about each other. Robin had learned that Rosan was from the summer island Batarilla. It was interesting because Robin had come to the South Blue specifically for that island. Not to go to it, of course. The brunette had heard that there was a heavy concentration of Marines on the island, and she figured it would give her the chance to lay low, unlike in West Blue, where they were highly alert for the Devil Child. Robin figured the Marines had something to do with why Rosan left the island. She asked as much, but, for once, Rosan's happy demeanor had completely vanished in favor of sadness. "Maybe some other time, Robin, he said, suddenly sounding depressed. "I promise I'll tell you eventually, but if I do now, I'll start crying a lot," was his sullen explanation. Robin nodded understandingly. Anything that would force a child, as young as him, to flee had to have been hard to talk about. She assumed one of the reasons had to do with Maud herself, but that couldn't be the only reason. If it were, he'd just have to hide the fact that he had her in the first place. There was another reason, but Robin didn't mind waiting for him to open up. Instead, as a show of trust, she told Rosan and Maud about what happened on O'Hara. She told them how her fellow scholars had been ruthlessly killed by the Marines simply because they were capable of reading the poneglyphs. She told him of the horrors that was a buster call, how her entire island had gotten assaulted and wiped off the planet by the Marines because they were deemed too dangerous. Robin told him the real reason that her bounty was as high as it was. She was the last person on the planet who could still read the poneglyphs, and how even before her island was destroyed she was considered an outcast due to her devil fruit and had no friends as a result. Throughout her entire explanation, she carefully watched both of their expressions. Maud was hard to read. She had put up that carefully woven mask. The only sign that what she was even affected was the slight furrow of her brow and how she lightly bit her lip. As Robin continued to inform them of what happened to her, though, her expression slowly melted into equal amounts fury and concern. Robin felt touched that so much concern was being directed her way. She had honestly never felt so much. Rosan wasn't difficult to read at all, but that made it all the more scary. Rosan radiated such palpable malice, and it was unnerving. She hadn't known him for long, but she could tell, by the worried side glance from Maud, that this wasn't normal. He was so angry. Grit teeth were bared, showing how sharp his fangs were, and he clenched his fists so hard she feared he would draw blood. Most terrifying, however, were his eyes. Those mesmerizing purple orbs weren't glowing like they normally did. No, instead, the shine had vanished, completely replaced by a dark glacial glare that made her shudder. It was like looking into the depths of the ocean. It was wrong. She found herself dearly missing the way his eyes strangely glowed. They were much better than how empty they looked currently. A small part of her feared that Rosan was upset with her. When she finally finished, the 8-year-old slumped over, mentally exhausted, due to the tale she told. She had no tears remaining for O'Hara. They had already been spent months ago, so her eyes remained dry, but that didn't mean she wasn't tired. Footsteps alerted her of a presence approaching, and she watched as Rosan abruptly got up and began walking towards her. Months of living in paranoia made Robin cringe back as he finally reached her. What he did, however, surprised her. Rosan hugged her. It was a tight hug, full of love and understanding, and Robin had never felt anything like it before. Feeling another set of arms wrap around her tiny frame, Robin was shocked to see Maud had joined as well. Why? Why were they being so nice to her? She was the devil child. The entire world feared her. Everyone she allied with eventually faced destruction, and yet she always managed to get away. She was a curse, an omen of only bad things to come. Everything she held dear had been destroyed in front of her. Her mother, killed. Her only friend, frozen solid. Robin had lost everything, and the small girl forgot what it felt like to have bonds. It was in everyone's best interest to stay away from her, and she agreed with them. The 8-year-old didn't want to form relationships with people just so they could die because of her. So why couldn't she push Rosan away? Robin, nay, it's okay, I understand, Rosan said softly, contrasting how angry he had looked before. You don't have to be alone anymore, Robin. Please be a little selfish, the boy requested as he gently rubbed her back. We're here for you, no matter what, okay? I'll protect you with everything I've got always, I promise. Rosan swore. He's right, Robin, Maud agreed, and Robin was so surprised to see that same caring look that she reserved for Rosan, aimed at her of all people. We haven't known you for long, but I'm already quite fond of you. So, I will help you in any way that I can. They both continued hugging her, and it was clear that they did not planning on letting her go in the slightest. Robin couldn't help the emotions overwhelming her. The brunette burst into tears as she clutched tiny Rosan's frame and sobbed into his shirt. She hadn't realized, but for so long she had desperately craved this. The unconditional support and care from someone was something that she severely lacked growing up. Just one person was enough. That's all she asked for, and now that she had finally received it, it was too much for the little girl. So she cried and cried. Rosan and Maud silently held onto her, accepting her tears with not a single noise. They would not interrupt her breakdown. They had told her to be selfish, and so they let her cry. She needed this. As Rosan idly rubbed her hair, the same way he enjoyed getting his hair rubbed, Robin's cries slowly died down until they were non-existent. Still, they refused to release her. They would be the pillar that she needed at the moment. Eventually, her breathing evened out, and it only took them a moment to realize she had fallen asleep. Allowing Maud-chan to take her, Rosan watched silently as she clutched the older woman, like her life depended on it, and buried her head into the devil fruit's ample bosom. Maud-chan inclined her head silently and began to walk away so she could find somewhere to let Robin rest. As she rounded the corner and disappeared, Rosan finally allowed his full anger to be brought to the forefront again. He snarled hatefully as he recalled the story he heard from Robin. Who do the Marines think they are to decide who gets to live and who gets to die? Rosan growled. Aren't they supposed to be the good guys? Why is it that every time I encounter one, I want to hurt them as badly as they hurt me? Rosan was furious. The boy was practically seeing red as insidious thoughts about the world government began making its way into his head. It was true. All things Rosan heard about the Marines only painted them in a negative light to the little boy. There were good Marines, he was sure of it, but the bad ones made the redhead want to vomit. They stay on his island killing every single baby just so that they could get their hands on his little brother, killing his mother in the process, and now they completely lay waste to an island, leaving his friend with nothing but a bounty, simply because they could read a language? Unforgivable. There was no doubt in his mind now. Rosan knew what he needed to do. The Marines would regret all their corrupt decisions that caused Rosan to lose so much. He would make sure of it. For hurting everything he cared for, Ace, Mama, Maud-chan, Robin. For hurting them and making them cry, he would make sure they got what they deserved. Rosan swore they would pay. In chapter. Slight age sheet. Ages. Portgas D. Rosan, 4, soon to be 5. His birthday is March 12th. Modification dash. Appears 18. Nico Robin, 8, soon to be 9. Portgas D. Ace, 3 weeks old. And you probably noticed that Rosan likes to switch between modify and modification. Modify is for simple techniques and modification is for the ones that require a lot more thought, i.e. modify, form, and modification. Link. Hope you enjoyed this chapter. I'm not used to doing fight scenes, so I hope this one was good enough. I wanted to make a curb stomp look at least somewhat entertaining. Chapter 4 will be a pretty big time skip. Bye for now, and here's the title for the next chapter. Chapter 4. Mischief. Disclaimer. Only thing I own are my original characters and any, maybe, fruits I decide to add to the story. I wonder if I have to do this every chapter. And much shorter than last chapter, but that's only because the next chapter is kind of really massive. Consider this one a bit of a filler before I drop Chapter 5. Descent. Chapter 4. Mischief. Boss. There's an eye intruder in the area. They're chasing me right now. A nervous voice yelled, barging hesitantly into a room. I saw them. It was like a moving shadow was out there, and they saw me and now, I don't know where anyone else is. Instinctively, he cringed back and shielded his face after realizing what he had just done. The boss could be pretty unforgiving when you disrespected him, and he had just barged into his room without knocking. After a pregnant pause, he slowly lowered his arms when he realized that it was quiet. Unnervingly quiet. He nervously glanced around the boss room and noticed that it was devoid of human presence. This wasn't normal. Something was off, and the feeling of dread in his stomach was only growing stronger. Where had the boss gone? Maybe he had occupied himself with one of the many ladies of their crew and went to a more remote part of their island? The boss frequently busied himself with that, and it wouldn't be the first time he decided to do so on a whim. Whatever the case, he needed to find him now before it was too late. Before that thing he saw reached them all. Juro was one of the newer members of the crew. He hadn't been a part of it for very long, and he was treated quite unfairly due to his meek nature. This would be the third night in a row where he was on watch duty, and the bruises that he would inevitably get were never worth the complaints. The man had practically resigned himself to permanent watchman, and so he decided not to think too much about it. He had been lazily watching for signs of anything at sea, when suddenly a dark silhouette had shown up in his line of sight. After concentrating in that direction, Juro was quickly able to identify it as a ship, and a look of confusion made its way onto his face. That should have been his first warning sign. The boss hadn't said anything about a ship arriving to their island, nor did he hear anything about one of their ships leaving previously. Seeing as he was the only one currently on watch duty, he prepared to go alert someone of the ship just in case they were hostile. Before he could get down from his watchtower, the ship vanished before his eyes. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. Blinking to make sure his eyes weren't playing tricks on him, Juro confirmed that yes, the ship actually was gone. He grabbed a scope lying down to get a closer look at the area. Large ships didn't just vanish from sight. Had he been hallucinating? He didn't see anything at the shore, so maybe his eyes had been playing tricks? Assured that there was nothing there, and that he simply needed some sleep, Juro once again paused as he saw something move in his peripheral. Juro's anxiety spiked, and the man slowly raised the telescope to his eyes again. He was desperately praying that his eyes had been deceiving him and that there really was nothing there. As he looked through the scope, his breath hitched. There was somebody there, and they were looking right at him. Juro screamed in shock and dropped the telescope. His eyes couldn't have been deceiving him. There was someone on shore, and they noticed each other in the darkness of the night. He scrambled to find anybody to help decide what to do about the obvious intruder because he refused to deal with them alone. What was that thing? He hadn't been able to get a good look, but it was something clad in all black, blending almost perfectly in the night. Juro kept looking back in fear as he sprinted to their main base at speeds he didn't even know he could achieve. Good, there was nobody there. He was safe for now, and that meant he would be able to reach someone in time. He had taken a detour into the forest to try and lose whatever it was he had seen, and it seemed as if it were working. At this rate, he'd be able to alert someone of what he had seen. He failed to notice the glowing purple eyes staring at him on the branch of one of the trees above. That had been nearly 10 minutes ago. In his mad scramble, he hadn't found a single person yet. They were probably partying on a part of the island he didn't frequent often and failed to notify him. It wouldn't be the first time. But where would that even be? Should he really risk going out there and running into? Maybe he'd wait here for Captain to show up. Juro, in his delirious state, failed to realize that there was no noise whatsoever on the island. Or maybe he did realize and just refused to accept it. Still, he wasn't even slightly less worried. It made him feel worse, actually. He was alone with a mysterious monster out there who was probably waiting for him. And maybe the monster had already gotten his crew? But how? Their ship had just arrived onto the island, and he had only been running for 10 minutes. Was that thing really that fast? If that were the case, what could he even do? Maybe he could beg for his life? Would he be spared if he prostrated himself and pleaded? Something clattered audibly onto the floor. Juro whirled around in fear as he heard approaching footsteps headed straight for him. His anxiety reached an all-time high and, panicking, he tripped on his feet before hastily crawling into the furthest corner. Tears welled into his eyes as impending doom walked through the door and the man began praying for his life to be spared, words already on the cusp of his lips. When the figure finally walked through the door, Juro opened his mouth, only to pause in confusion. That didn't really look like a monster. 10-year-old Nico Robin, and the newest addition to their crew, shot him the most unimpressed stare he had ever received from a 10-year-old. Despite the embarrassment he felt at the position she had seen him in, he was happier than he could imagine knowing that he would survive another minute. He felt so relieved that he could cry. Wait, never mind. He was already crying. Juro, Robin greeted with a kind smile, causing him to shakily smile back, as relief flooded his entire being. Oh, thank Cammy, it was just the devil child. She had just joined the crew, and based on her bounty, she was definitely one of the strongest ones here. He just had to tell her what he had seen, and she would protect him. Standing up on wobbly legs, Juro exclaimed gratefully, Thank Cammy you're here, Robin. There's a monster out there, and we need to stop it. The man missed the way Robin's eyes narrowed slightly at that, and if he had caught it, maybe he'd have been a bit more cautious. But he didn't. Do why you know where the other crew members are? Robin nodded in confirmation, and he said, Great. Let's go quickly tell them about whatever that was. Make sure you protect me from it, all right? Smile back on her face, Robin said, Of course. Follow me this way, and I'll keep you safe. With that, she turned around and promptly left. Juro was surprised at how seemingly unfazed she was at the whole situation. But then again, she was the devil child. Something like this must have been right up her alley. Truthfully, he found her unsettling to be around, but he wouldn't look a gift horse in the mouth. Hastily following after her, he muttered under his breath, Maybe the two freaks will take each other out, and exited the room. They had been walking for a while now, and not once had the monster shown itself. Juro nearly face-bombed in shame, if not for the fact that he didn't want to appear dumber than he already felt. Robin must have thought he was a complete idiot now. Just great. He wasn't even sure if the monster existed now. But the chill he felt when they made eye contact felt so real. It couldn't have been fake. No, that monster had to be real. He was sure of it. Juro was willing to bet his life that he had not been hallucinating. Which begged the question, what was it doing now? Juro was sure it would follow him, but ever since he had entered the forest, he hadn't seen it even once. That was it. It was afraid of Nico Robin. The monster probably didn't want to have a face-off against the little child with a bounty of 79 million berry. Juro couldn't blame him. Someone with a bounty that high in the blue seas was unprecedented, and not much people wanted to face the devil child due to that knowledge. Guess even monsters feared devils. He was safe from that monster as long as he stayed with the brunette. His confidence renewed tenfold when Robin suddenly said, We're here. Smiling in victory, he quickly ran to stand next to Robin. Juro's victorious feeling was abruptly cut short. Instead, it turned into confusion, and then horror as he soaked in what he was currently seeing. The man instinctively took a step back at the sight before him. Bodies were littered everywhere. Their crew's bodies. In the dark, he couldn't tell whether they were breathing or not, but that didn't matter right now. What mattered was the dark-clad figure sitting on the boss's seat, with the boss's unconscious body under its lazily put-up feet. It was the monster right there, and it was staring at them both with its head tilted, almost like it was curious. From its seated position, he could make out that, true to what he had seen, the figure was dressed in all black. A long cloak dominated its tiny frame, stopping it just above their boot-covered feet. A hoodie sat snugly on their head, showing only an endless black where their face was supposed to be. They were idly flipping a small dagger as they regarded them both with interest. Juro began to panic as he hastily hid behind Robin. "Nico, Robin, that's them. That's the M-monster that I saw on the ship," Juro exclaimed in fear. "They must have gotten to everyone else in the crew as well. We gotta save them," he said, shaking her rapidly in the process. Slowly removing his hands from her shoulder, Robin regarded him coolly. Juro began to fidget from that unknown look in her eyes, but eventually she said, smile back on her face, "Yes, that's definitely the monster you saw on the ship. Though, I must correct you on something." Looking down at her, Juro was confused. "What's wrong? You can't fight it? Is that it?" he asked, puzzled and more than a little annoyed. "Just hold it back while I wake up the others in that case," he said as he prepared to go awaken all the other members. Robin sighed as she shook her head. He was truly an idiot. "That won't be necessary." At his questioning glance, she continued, "You're right that he was the one on the ship. However, he wasn't the one who took out the crew members. That honor lies with me," she ended with a smile. If he had stopped to think with even a slightly normal mind, he would have noticed something amiss, but alas, not everyone wanted to see the truth. Slowly, realization dawned onto Juro as he digested her words. His face morphed into one of fury as he raged. "You traitorous bitch! How could you turn against us? Now, we're all gonna die to the monster because you chose the worst time to do so." He tried to approach her, but his body crashed into the ground. Looking up, he saw that same black-clad figure crushing his head into the dirt. Upon closer inspection, he could see a faint purple glow under the hood. "What did you just call her?" they asked softly, and Juro began quaking at the threatening tone. These two were in cahoots with each other? Since when? Utterly undisturbed, Robin simply shook her head in exasperation. "Wrong again, Juro. I was never on your side to begin with, so I haven't betrayed anyone," she said simply. With a confident smile on her face, she said, "A monster and a devil working together. Quite terrifying, don't you think?" And after that simple statement, Juro felt a palm rest softly against the back of his head. This had been a setup, he realized. Nico Robin had infiltrated them and sold them out to whatever this thing was with zero remorse. She really was a devil, and no one could control a devil. Why did the boss have to recruit her? Modification. Jam was the last thing he heard before his mind went blank. 6-year-old Rosan removed his hoodie and surveyed the work they had done with a wild grin on his face. In the 2 years that they had been traveling together, Rosan had gained few changes. He had gotten taller, standing at a healthy 4 feet 4 inches, 132 centimeters, and his hair spiked down even more wildly. Underneath his black cloak was an entirely new outfit as well. A long-sleeved black shirt with a red rose in the middle of it and black cargo pants lined with red tucked neatly into his black and white shoes. All in all, he looked much similar to his 4-year-old counterpart with the exception of having less baby fat, a new outfit, and messier hair. His unique purple eyes still shone brilliantly, and Robin often asked him if he modified the glow into his eyes with how bright they were. He didn't. Truthfully, he didn't know why they glowed. It was like this even before he had Madchan, and Mama liked to tease him by saying he ate a lamp as a baby. The tears of panic in his eyes had made her fall from laughter. Robin, similarly to Rosan, had not changed too much over the 2 years, but it was more than Rosan did. Her hair had stayed the same shoulder length that she preferred, and she stood at a height of 4 feet 10 inches, 147 centimeters. She had opted against wearing her long purple dress and now donned a purple jacket over a simple black blouse. To finish, she had long dark blue pants and matching boots. Robin, You sure you needed me? You seem to handle this just fine without me, Rosan exclaimed, looking at the littered bodies in a little bit of awe. She had managed to get every single one of them, but one in that dude was barely worth mentioning. Robin, it was pretty scary when she wanted to be. Blushing at the praise, Robin rolled her eyes and said, "It was dumb of them to trust me so easily. I just took advantage of it and poisoned every one of them. Anyone who resisted, I promptly broke their bones and incapacitated them," she explained like it was no big deal at all. Worse, Rosan nodded along, as if there was no problem at all with what she stated. Monstrous little children. Their plan was rather simple. All matters of crews and organizations wanted the service of the devil child, Nico Robin, for one reason or another. So over the years, the two of them abused that plan to a wild degree. Robin would join the crew, while Rosan would secretly tail them. The brunette stayed with them for as long as the redhead was willing to not see her, which hardly ever lasted more than a few days. Then, with their shared connection through modification, Rosan, guided by Robin, would show up and they would destroy them from the inside out. It was a surprisingly good plan considering Rosan came up with it, though, like all his other schemes, it was risky. The first few times they had done it, Rosan hadn't even given her a day to settle in before barging in and taking everyone out. The look of surprise on her face as she saw the bodies taken out single-handedly would have made her laugh, if she weren't the one being subject to it. To her utter disbelief, when asked why he was here so early, his only reasoning was, "I missed you, Robin," and he shot her the most adorable puppy dog eyes. Robin had feigned anger, but immediately, the deadly eyes managed to blow past all her preparation. The brat was too smart for his own good. She had melted immediately and let the topic drop. But why go through the trouble of attacking multiple organizations? Well, it began soon after they first met. 2 years ago. "We're going to run out of money eventually," Robin mused. The funds they had borrowed from the Saber Pirates were good for 2 people, but they would still need to buy necessities, and that meant they'd need a source of income. Robin had recently woken up from her rather embarrassing nap. She had been sleeping soundly in Maud's breasts. After apologizing profusely to the amused woman who had just waved her off, she had left Rosan's mindscape, along with the little boy himself, and now they were discussing how they were going to approach traveling together. They had both agreed that it would likely be just the two of them traveling with each other on this ship. The likelihood of them recruiting any other member was very low due to a various amount of reasons. Neither of them wanted to be the leader. Rosan didn't want anyone leading them, and it would be difficult to find trustworthy people. While it was concerning at first, Maud-chan had assured the 8-year-old that she and Rosan would make up for the lack of members on their ship and that there was nothing to worry about. She would have been hard-pressed to believe them, but she saw what Rosan's devil fruit was capable of and knew that it was incredibly versatile. The fear on Rosan's face at Maud's confident statement made her giggle. Worries assuaged, Robin began thinking about anything else they would need. If Maud-chan said she had it handled, then Robin trusted her. The devil fruit seemed much more reliable than Rosan, so her statements were believable. In her musing, it didn't take her long to find their next, and perhaps biggest, issue. Money. Getting money was going to be a bit of a problem. Robin, being a wanted girl, made it quite difficult for her to get a steady source of income. She couldn't imagine how someone as young as Rosan would be able to get one as well. Voicing her concerns to the two caused Rosan to adopt a thinking pose. It was even accompanied by the boy cupping his chin. Robin suddenly grew nervous at that look on his face. If the boy's invasion of his newly acquired ship was any indication, then when Rosan had a plan, things were bound to get bad. Rosan slammed a fist against his palm as an idea came to him. "We can just steal the money. When we get to a new island, I can just sneak around and take their stuff. I'm pretty good at sneaking around." He beamed. Robin blinked at that. It wasn't a dangerous, or even bad, idea at all, which surprised her. Maybe his ship idea was an outlier, and she could expect more normal plans from him? Yeah, there was absolutely no way. Narrowing her eyes at him and crossing her arms, Robin simply said, "You're leaving some key details out, aren't you?" Rosan regarded her in slight confusion before saying, "I didn't think it was that important, but okay. Basically, I was thinking we could use your bounty on people to bait them, then we can take them out and take their money. That way, it's one less group trying to sabotage you, and we have income." He thought that wasn't important. He's only 4. He's only 4. He's only 4. Robin repeated the mantra to herself as she felt her blood pressure rise. No one had ever managed to get her to feel such a way, and she felt pretty proud that it took an actually psychotic boy to be the first. She let out a deep breath to compose herself and regarded the 4-year with patience. Rosan, next time you think of a plan, please tell me in full so that we can talk about it in detail more, she said slowly to the redhead. At Rosan's enthusiastic nod, the 8-year-old allowed herself to think of the plan more. It wasn't a bad idea, but it was potentially dangerous if things went wrong, but she had already been hopping between organizations and crews that wanted her. That wouldn't change. The only difference now is that instead of the world government eventually finding and crushing said organizations, a combined effort of her and Rosan would be the one to do it. Well, it certainly gave her more control, so that was a plus. After mulling it over a bit more, Robin came to a decision. All right, we can go with your plan, the girl decided eventually. Quick to curb Rosan's excitement, Robin said, but we need to set up some ground rules. First, we can't go after anyone too dangerous yet. Second, please don't be so reckless. Third, we need some way to communicate so that we know when to enact our plans, okay? I'm happy to know that you're so reliable, Maud said, sounding pleased. Robin blushed in happiness at the woman's praise. All right, it'll be easy, Rosan exclaimed, and Robin smiled at his enthusiasm. Rosan was talented, so she didn't doubt his claims. As long as they followed the plan, it would be easy. Present. It had not been easy. Robin sighed fondly at the memories of when they first started doing this. It was a disaster. It wasn't that it was dangerous. In fact, it was pretty easy. The problem remained in another key issue. Rosan was possessive. Really possessive. The very first time she had infiltrated someone's crew, she had been out of Rosan's sight for, not even a day, before he came barging into their base. Her only warning had been Madchan, who, along with Rosan, was linked to her through their shared connection. Robin had watched Rosan rampage in their base with a look of pure disbelief that eventually turned into acceptance. She finally realized that trying to think of the redhead in a normal light would only degrade her sanity because the boy had long since lost his. He had been done in a matter of minutes. Groaning bodies littered the floor as Rosan excitedly approached her. Robin looked at him in pure defeat as Rosan threw their entire plan out of the window without a second thought. Maud offered up an apology and said, "Really, you should have expected this." "Rosan," she began. "Yes, Robin, was his innocent response. "What are you doing here?" "Doing the plan, Robin. Don't you think it's a bit too early to enact the plan? It hasn't even been a day yet." "I missed you, Robin, he said bluntly. "I didn't want you staying with them. I wanted you to stay with me." She looked at him like he were a complete idiot at his statement. "Rosan, this was your plan. Why did you even think of this if you couldn't handle me leaving?" "I didn't think you were gonna leave for that long," he protested with his cheeks puffed. "I started missing you after 1 hour and decided it would be fine if I got here early." "You look pretty today, Robin, Robin, Robin walked away and Rosan hastily followed after, calling her name the entire time. She couldn't deal with him. Rosan was unbelievable. Completely unbelievable. Madchan laughed the entire time. "Whatcha thinking about, Robin, Rosan asked curiously, snapping her out of her daze. He was currently in her personal space, but she was used to it by now. Looking down at the boy in her face, Robin smiled mischievously and said, "Just thinking about the first time we did this and how you refused to let me out of your sight for even a day." Rosan blushed in embarrassment as he remembered exactly what she was talking about. The boy pouted at her, practically whining, and said, "I can't help it. I was lonely, so I went to get you." Continuing, he said, "At least I got better, though." Robin snorted at that. "You sure did. Now you can last 3 whole days before you come get me." Really impressive. As she spoke, a dark cloud hung over Rosan's head. Robin could be so cruel sometimes. He was just praising her, and now she was harassing him?
Mushen.
"Robin's bullying me. Do something," Rosan demanded as he spoke to his devil fruit. Madchan giggled and she said, "It's not Robin's fault that you're so needy, Rosan. Honestly, You're lucky we're so fond of you. I'm sure anyone else would be fed up with your possessive streak. Madchan was just as cruel as Robin, Rosan decided. They were both big bullies who ganged up on him because he was the youngest, and he didn't have to put up with this at all. No, he wouldn't put up with this at all. He was an independent young boy who could make his own decisions, and he decided that he didn't want to be here anymore. He stalked away from Robin. I'm going back to the ship, you jerk. Don't follow me. And with that, he vanished into the forest. Robin stared, amused, at the boy's retreating figure. Any second now and he would... A smaller figure crashed into her, dropping her to the ground. Snuggling her happily, Rosan said, I missed you, and continued cuddling his best friend. Robin couldn't hold it back anymore and started laughing uncontrollably. She fondly said, I missed you too, Rosan, and returned his hug. The boy's happiness was infectious, and the brunette couldn't help feeling glad to see him herself, even if he was here too early. Reunion finished, they both got up and patted themselves. Glancing around at the still fallen crew members, Rosan said, They're stuck here. I destroyed all their ships while that dude was running from me, and took everything. If they do wake up, they won't be able to make it off, and the Marines will probably find him sooner or later 'cause I tipped them off. Robin nodded with a smile at how efficient the boy was. Rosan understood exactly what to do, and it swelled her and Madchan with pride. The brunette said, Great job, Rosan. Let's get off this island then and see what we can do with the loot. With that, they began walking back to the shore. As they arrived, Rosan dug in his pocket and pulled out a tiny black ship. Modify, increase, and he tossed it into the sea. After a 3-second delay, it grew fully into the White Rose, their ship, and swayed gently in the sea, awaiting them to board. Robin stretched as she made it back onto the soft grass of the ship. Over their 2 years together, Rosan continuously made changes to the ship. Outwardly, not much had changed except for the addition of grass on top of the wood of the deck. The ship was sleeker, built for speed, and Rosan modified it to the point where he was the only one that could fully utilize the ship. While the ship could sail, said sails were often furled up due to being powered by Rosan's devil fruit. It did not really need the wind to keep moving, and that was great because it meant they would always be able to escape. All in all, while it was still the same ship, it definitely looked and felt much more comfortable. Rosan, I'm going to take a bath first if you don't mind. I'll make dinner after I finish, Robin told him. Rosan nodded at her, removing a tiny bag from his pockets in the process. After a quick use of modification, the bag expanded and he began taking out and organizing everything that they stole. He was surprisingly diligent. Robin let him be and made her way to the shower. She began thinking about her redhead companion as she got ready. Rosan's growth in power was downright explosive. Madchan admitted that Rosan's use of modification was better than even she had anticipated, and he was already surpassing her in terms of creativity with the devil fruit. His versatility with it had become a sight to see, and he was still scratching the surface. The 6-year-old had even managed to make a variation of Link that did not knock her unconscious and drag her into the mindscape. Now, she could speak to Madchan whenever she wanted, and Robin really did love talking to her. The older woman was very pleasant to be around, and she spoke to Robin like an equal instead of a child, which the girl appreciated. Rosan was a genius that was growing faster than either of them expected. The Mod Nomi user still lamented at the fact that he couldn't transform into a dragon though. The prodigy was used to getting everything on either his first or second try with minimal effort. The fact that he couldn't achieve his number 1 goal as easily as everything else left him quite annoyed. This was good for him though. Rosan was more stubborn than anyone she had ever met. Whether he reached his goal or not of transforming into a dragon would be a valuable lesson either way. He would either learn that anything was achievable as long as he put his mind to it, or it would teach him early on some things were just not worth pursuing. She had faith in him though. The 6-year-old was going to grow into a real monster. Finished with her shower, Robin dried herself and dressed in a lavender nightgown that Rosan had bought for her. The redhead had seen her eyeing it last year and decided to gift it to her as a present. She had kissed the boy on the cheek when he said he actually bought it for her birthday instead of stealing it. Seeing him blush in embarrassment was worth it. It was adorable. Well, whatever the case, she was glad Rosan was on her side. He was very unpredictable, and he absolutely hated listening to people. The boy truly believed that his course of action was the best sometimes, and would sometimes completely disregard a plan if he thought his was better. The redhead had such an ego. He marched to the beat of his own drums, and it fit perfectly with his chaotic nature. Luckily, the 6-year-old adored her so much that, barring Ma-chan, she was the only other person he listened to. Exiting the bathroom, Robin crossed paths with Rosan on the way to the kitchen. "I'm done bathing, Rosan. I'm gonna make pasta now, so you should go shower." The boy's eyes lit up as he nodded vigorously. He absolutely loved pasta, and though Robin wasn't the greatest of cooks, the way he ate her food and praised her never failed to make her blush. Robin headed to the kitchen as Rosan went to go bathe in order to prepare for the meal. Rosan took fairly long baths. Mama had taught him that hygiene was important, and the boy was surprisingly vain, so she was in no rush. The 10-year-old began removing everything necessary to make the meal and began humming a tune that she heard Rosan sing on multiple occasions. The boy could really sing. "When you walk away, you don't hear me say, 'Please, oh baby, don't go.'" Rosan was in the shower, soaping his hair, as he happily sang to himself. Steam rose as hot water splashed against his body. A hot shower, after a job well done, with pasta on the way, was a great way to put Rosan in a fantastic mood. He loved how Robin cooked. She always talked about how she wasn't that good at cooking, but Rosan didn't care because the effort she put into the food made it taste like one of the best meals to him. 2 years traveling with Robin had been great. They had gotten incredibly close due to finding comfort in each other with their trauma, and Rosan could trust the older girl with anything. Their bond had increased tremendously, and they were so in sync that they could easily read each other now. The near constant link they had with each other helped too. Ma-chan and Robin both said he was too possessive, to which he stubbornly disagreed to. He wasn't possessive for missing Robin. The 10-year-old never let him forget the first mission they went on, but they had still completed it with no issues. He simply hadn't calculated on how much he would miss her presence the moment she disappeared. So, to stop feeling bad, he went to get her. Perfectly reasonable. You're right. He wasn't possessive, just reasonably worried. "Whatever you say, Rosan," Maud's mirthful voice said. Over the 2 years, her appearance had changed very little. She still retained the appearance of an 18-year-old, and her signature black dress had minor changes. She had opted to decorate it with more white streaks near the edges, and on the back of her dress was a white rose similar to the one that donned their ship. On her breast area of the dress was the white cube that was her devil fruit. Her time around Rosan, much like Robin, had mellowed the purple-haired woman out considerably. It was impossible not to get affected by the redhead's constant cheer and sunny personality. The 6-year-old had greatly affected them both, and the, once slightly frigid, Maud had turned into a warm person that only wanted the best for both Robin and Rosan. She had practically adopted the both of them as her own, and she was much more playful, constantly teasing and embarrassing the both of them to great effect. It was as funny as it was sad. Robin especially was not used to getting much praise at all, so Ma-chan made sure to shower the little girl in them. Rosan, the empathetic soul that he was, quickly caught on to her motives, and the two of them constantly bombarded the Hana Nomi user with compliments whenever the opportunity arose. The poor girl had no clue how to react to the praise, but her confidence had been steadily increasing in response to it. Good, the girl needed it. Finishing his shower, Rosan shut the water off with a mental command. He had modified the shower as well. It used to be only a bath, but he had modified a shower head onto it. The redhead wiped his soft spikes and let out a content sigh. He loved showering. Him and Robin were both devil fruit users, so bathing could be potentially dangerous if one of them got submerged. They had sent pointed glances at him, much to his chagrin. So Rosan had permanently borrowed a book from a store about the structure of various appliances. Learning it had been easy enough, and, prepped with the new knowledge, Rosan had done some much-deserved quality of life in not only the bathroom, but all the other rooms as well. Man, he loved Ma-chan. Her abilities were really useful, and they made Robin and his lives so much easier. What he was capable of doing with modification was nothing short of incredible. If not for her, he wouldn't have made it so far so fast. Especially at his age too? He was probably the strongest 6-year-old out there. Was there a 6-year-old alive right now who was stronger than him? Nope. If that were the case, they might as well hand him the title of strongest right now. That's not how it works, Rosan, a blushing Madchan said. Rosan laughed as he dressed in a simple black tee and shorts at how easily flustered she was. Her and Robin were really unused to getting compliments, a fact that he abused religiously whenever he got the chance. Though he meant everything he said, using it to get away with things was an added bonus that he wouldn't say no to. Making his way to the kitchen, Rosan hummed to himself. Mama used to sing to him all the time, and as a result, he loved music. He never failed to hum a tune to himself, and now was no different. Maybe he should learn an instrument? The guitar sounded fun, but he also liked the piano. He would look into that some other time. Why wouldn't he be humming right now? Robin was making pasta, and Rosan loved pasta. The 10-year-old should be done any time now, and she wouldn't begin eating until he arrived. He didn't want to keep her waiting because that was rude and Rosan was not rude. With that thought, Rosan rushed to the dining area. His damp hair sprayed water around as it shook in time with his movements. Turning instinctively and taking the shortest route, Rosan appeared to the dining room in record time. He knew the white rose like the back of his hand. He had worked on it after all, and the advanced ship was a product of his progress. Robin had already prepared a plate for him as he entered the room, to which he gratefully smiled at. The girl in question was sitting in the plush seat next to him, absent-mindedly reading a book, with steaming pasta in front of her. Noticing him immediately, she took one glance and went back to reading. "Dry your hair, Rosan. I don't want water in my pasta," was all she said. Rolling his eyes, Rosan stepped back a bit to put a hand in his hair, eyes glowing in the telltale sign of modification. He didn't feel like finding a towel, so he would just modify the moisture out. Slowly but surely, he guided his hand through his full head of hair. Every part he touched drained the excessive moisture out of his hair. In a matter of seconds, Rosan's spikes were free of water. Rosan grinned ear to ear and promptly sat right next to Robin. Shutting her book, Robin muttered a cheater under her breath and dug into her plate. Rosan laughed and began eating away at the pasta. The 6-year-old beamed as he showered Robin in praise at the food. It was so good. The girl lightly shoved him, blushing all the while. Ma joined in on the teasing, and the poor girl was subject to the double team of boy and fruit. "You too, that's not fair," Robin whined. She had been getting used to their teasing, but it still flustered her when they bombarded her with compliments like this. Rosan just laughed at her embarrassment and continued singing her praises between bites. Pouting, Robin turned back to her food and tried to tune him out unsuccessfully. It was difficult to ignore the redhead's presence. He was like a loud, shining sun, and he knew it. For such a sweet kid, Rosan sure was a jerk. The plaza was filled with people. They were chatting about whatever mundane thing they thought of. Others were trying to purchase items, and some just wanted to get home and had the misfortune of needing to go this way. All in all, it was a bustling area. There was something being done at every corner, but all of that something was so lackluster, so boring, perfect for what he wanted to do. Reaching into his pocket, 8-year-old Rosan pulled out the object of the hour with a wild look in his eye. In his palm rested a toy figure. Upon closer inspection, it could be easily identified as a robot. The robot was dominantly white with a blue dome on the top of its head. The same shade of blue covered a majority of its arms and appeared as tiny marks on its legs. Finished with his inspection, Rosan grinned mischievously. He and Robin had split up the moment they landed on this island. The preteen said she had girl business to do, whatever that meant, and when Rosan asked, she said she would tell him when he was older. Ma-chan had seemingly understood what the 12-year-old was doing and urged Rosan to give her a good sum of their berry. Without much fuss, they had went their own ways, promising to meet up on a remote part of the island. Now, here he was on the roof of one of the buildings in the plaza. Wearing his standard disguise in broad daylight was quite counterproductive to a disguise. Due to that, he had opted to wear a simple white and red hoodie and long black pants. His hair was tied up in a messy spiked ponytail so that he could put up his hoodie without his hair showing. In the odd chance someone took his hoodie off, they wouldn't even see him. He had modified his hair and turned it pitch black, and his eyes were of a similar shade with practically invisible irises. Not much had outwardly changed with Rosan, which he raged at, but his hair had grown longer. The 8-year-old had meant to cut it to shoulder length again, but it kept slipping his mind. Right now the redhead's ponytail reached his upper back, which was too long in his opinion, and he would probably cut it shorter after this trip. But besides that, he looked the exact same. Unlike Robin, who had suddenly begun growing in spades. She towered over him now and made sure to lord that fact over him constantly. She had informed him that she had begun going through puberty, which was why she was so much taller than him now, but seriously, she was too tall right now. The girl was over a foot taller than him right now. The 8-year-old needed to go through puberty now as well. Well, no matter. Right now Robin was somewhere doing something and he was bored, and this was how he would stave his boredom off. Was it a good idea? Probably not. Would it be fun? Absolutely. They were currently located on some island in the North Blue. He hadn't bothered to learn the name of it since they hadn't planned on staying too long on it. That meant he could play a little prank on these people. That would be fun. Smiling mischievously, Rosan set his plans in motion. Modify. Increase x10. He whispered as he threw the toy robot onto a largely empty zone of the plaza. He didn't want to kill anyone after all. That would be pretty bad, not to mention attention-grabbing. The passing people screamed as a giant something suddenly appeared from thin air. It didn't move at all, but that didn't register to the people. In seconds, the idle, boring nature had turned into a mad scramble as people tried to get out of there. People struggled to push past each other as they rushed to leave the area. The giant stayed stationary all the while, not making a single move. It made sense. He hadn't given it the ability to move after all. Although, he wondered how effective the robot could be when it could move. Could Rosan make it fight for him? He would need to look into that later. Within moments, the plaza was barren and Rosan laughed at his handiwork. Leaping off the roof, Rosan landed gently on the floor next to his toy robot, who remained stationary. Patting it happily on the leg, Rosan reverted the changes he had done and stuck the, now shrunken, toy back in his pocket. Another glance showed that no one had even been injured, so it was a huge success for him. I fail to realize what part of this qualifies as a prank, Rosan, a deadpan mod spoke. Shaking his head, as if dealing with a child, Rosan said, "You wouldn't understand, Mod-chan. Things like this just aren't your cup of tea. Then please enlighten me on how this is not an act of terrorism. Nobody got hurt, of course." "That's not how it works, Rosan." "Haha, you're too old, Mod-chan. That's why you don't understand." Rosan recognized his mistake a second too late, and his eyes widened in dread. "I'm sorry, may you please repeat that? You said I'm too what?" "I'm waiting, Rosan. Has anyone ever told you how amazing you look?" "Only 2 people know how I look, Rosan. Now stop avoiding my question."
Sorry, Mushen.
"I can't hear you over the sound of me not listening." "Ow. Okay. I'm sorry, Mod-chan. Please stop making my head hurt. Please." I said please. After Rosan learned the important lesson of not messing with Mod-chan for the 100th time, he had looted the plaza for things they needed. This is terrorism, Rosan. He was now headed to the designated spot where him and Robin were supposed to meet up. He rubbed his head to get rid of the lingering effects of his devil fruit's unnecessary assault as he walked into the empty clearing where he and Robin agreed to meet. Returning to his original crimson locks and royal purple eyes, Rosan sat down against a random tree and prepared to enter the mindscape. The boy wanted to give Mod-chan a piece of his mind before Robin got back about respecting his head. The 8-year-old closed his eyes, and right before he entered, he felt something. A clear gas slowly seeped into the clearing and Rosan's eyes snapped open in sudden alertness. Rosan hastily donned his mask, but it was too late. He had already inhaled some of the gas, which must have been sleeping gas, and it was quickly taking effect. The boy felt his body get sluggish, and he cursed. "Rosan, focus. I'm currently purging the poison from your body, so stay alert." Mod's urgent voice came out. Rosan swooned a bit, but shrugged it off as another problem quickly arose. They were surrounded. A group of people came out, and soon, there was no exit available to the clearing. They had all donned masks on, giving away the fact that they were the likely perpetrators of the gas. They all leaked a malicious aura, and Rosan had no illusion who the target of their ire was. A trap, meant just for him. Well, shit. He had always assumed Robin would be the one targeted by all sorts of people. Rosan never thought that someone besides the world government would have eyes on him of all people. Especially not so soon. It wasn't looking good for him. He could barely stay upright, and there looked to be at least 10 full-grown adults. Was this a setup? He had done well to hide his tracks on this island. Had he slipped up somewhere? It couldn't have been due to his robot shenanigan. These people had clearly been waiting for him to show up. Had he been set up? That was impossible. The only person who knew where the meetup spot was located was. No time to think about where it went wrong. These people were clearly hostile, and Rosan needed to deal with them fast so they could focus their full attention on the poison. These men needed to go by any means necessary. With that thought, Rosan braced himself. Amplifying himself like it was second nature, the 8-year-old launched himself at the nearest foe, hand balled into a fist that he quickly slammed into the offender's face. He offered himself a small sense of satisfaction at the man's agonized screams as he clenched his now broken nose. His screams were silenced as a swift kick to the skull knocked him unconscious. These men were far quicker to react, however, and soon, they all charged him at once. This seems fair, was his only thought before he was forced to duck under a heavy blow from a large man. In this crouched position, Rosan slammed his left foot on the man's legs and entered a handstand. Keeling over from the surprising amount of pain, he was greeted by 2 boot-clad feet crashing into his face that sent him into the realm of unconsciousness. Flipping himself upright, Rosan watched with slightly bleary eyes as the other men charged him. The first one who reached him swung a meaty fist down at him, but the 8-year-old grabbed onto the side of his arm and flew with the punch. Using the momentum against him, Rosan harshly pulled and the fat man crashed into the floor. 3 vicious stomps on his head meant he was down for the count as well. Rosan got up, but yelped as a kick crashed into his sides and he collapsed momentarily. He quickly shook himself awake as the effects of the poison seemed to get even stronger. Looking up at the offender in fury, Rosan dodged the second kick and delivered an elbow on the underside of the still extended leg. The resounding crunch was music to his ears. Everyone still fighting, barring Rosan, momentarily winced at the noise it made. It took the man a second to realize that his leg had been broken, but before he could even clutch it, Rosan had already moved onto his still healthy, for now, leg. Getting behind the now screaming man, Rosan delivered a roundhouse kick to his calf and watched in sadistic glee as the man fell over. Not finished yet, the redhead stomped on the man's legs over and over again. Repeatedly, he stamped on the same spot until he grew tired of it. The bone in that area was more akin to dust after he finished. Rosan wanted to admire his handiwork, but he couldn't. Not yet. The 8-year-old got up as the other men paused to apprehensively look at him. No one seemed to be in a rush to fight the boy who had dispatched 4 of their own that easily. Good. They feared him. That would help him in the long run if he wanted to get out of this with minimal injuries. Taking a step forward, Rosan contemplated on who to go for next. Most likely he would target the one on the farthest left. He looked the most afraid, and he'd likely be able to take him out quickly. Mind made up, Rosan took another step forward and stumbled. The poison had finally caused him to slip up, and it seemed like the men were waiting for this exact moment. Like sharks smelling blood, they converged on him immediately. He had fortified himself with modification, but he was still only 8, and he was going up against grown adults. There was no way he'd be able to handle an onslaught from these men for longer. Panicking slightly, Rosan realized he wouldn't be able to hide modification from these men because he needed to use it. It was the only way out of this situation. The only problem was that Mod was forcing a lot of the power into keeping him awake and counteracting the poison. No matter, he would just... A blunt object smashed into the back of his head, interrupting his thought process, and, without so much as a peep, Rosan blacked out. Man, what an annoyingly strong brat. I can see why the doc wanted him now, person number 1 said. Yeah, let's hope he was worth the trouble, said person number 2. Doesn't matter if he isn't, Doc gets what he wants. Now cuff him and let's go, person 1 demanded. What about the others? Asked person 3. Burn the bodies and hide them. They aren't useful anymore. Person 1 responded bluntly. But Person 3 tried to protest.
But
Person 1 said in a threatening manner. Nothing, was 3's only response. Good, since you care about these bodies so much I'll leave the job to you, was all one said before hauling up the child's body and walking off. The others quickly followed after him, leaving 3 alone to do the task. This island was quickly becoming unsafe to stay on. Normally that would be fine for Robin, as she would just leave with Rosan, with a new disguise on, but there was a major problem that could not be ignored. Rosan was nowhere to be found. He had been missing for the better part of 3 days now, and the 12-year-old was terribly worried. They rarely separated for this long, and, though she liked to tease him about how possessive he was, she was nearly as clingy of the boy as he was of her. She was just much better at hiding it. But now, she couldn't find him, and the signs were pointing at the worst. It all started when she was headed back to the clearing that they agreed to meet up on. Robin had begun noticing changes within her body, which she knew was puberty, and with the guidance of some books and Madchan, she was quickly off to buy the proper things needed. She separated from Rosan with that goal in mind. The girl had contemplated taking him with her, but the boy's penchant for chaos would undoubtedly be a hindrance, so she firmly told him to do something else. She already regret making that decision. After buying herself the essentials, the budding Robin had made the long trek back to the clearing. She was on the opposite side of the island, so Rosan would definitely whine at her for taking so long. Rubbing a certain spot on his head always caused him to forgive her immediately, though. Finally arriving to the meeting spot they had agreed on, Robin braced herself for the inevitable tackle and the complaints about how late she was. Silence greeted her, and Robin glanced around the clearing in confusion. Something wasn't right, and she suddenly felt nervous. Rosan should have been here by now, so where was he? Upon closer inspection, Robin noticed just what was so off with the area. There had been an intense scuffle here. Marks littered the floors, and there was blood in various spots. Worry started seeping into her frame as she used her devil fruit to sprout eyes all across the field. It only confirmed her fears. Based on what she was seeing, Rosan had likely been attacked, and she hadn't been there to help him. From the looks of it, he had lost too. Rosan was strong. Robin knew this firsthand, and for him to be defeated here, was he ambushed? This blood, was it his? Frantically, Robin began searching all over for the young boy. Her search of the island was a negative, though. No matter how hard she looked, Rosan was nowhere to be seen. The boy had disappeared completely, and Robin began to fear the worst. Worst of all, the Marines had begun flocking to this island, almost as if someone had alerted them. She had to stay hidden in her approach for Rosan, but it was getting difficult, and she had made a few close calls already. Unless she risked being captured, she'd have to leave the island soon. It had been 3 days since she began looking for him, and, as the days went by, she was beginning to lose hope. She had tried to use the connection between the two of them, and it brought nothing but radio silence. The final nail in the coffin had been during her search for him. She had stumbled upon the burnt figure of a body with Rosan's clothes. Tears pricked her eyes as she lost her breath.
No.
This wasn't possible. He couldn't be dead. Robin ruthlessly composed herself and started thinking rationally. Panicking was not going to help her figure out what actually happened to Rosan. It was obvious that he was ambushed, and the redhead had done nothing to warrant getting killed. No, it was unlikely that Rosan had been killed. By the looks of it, he had been captured. Madchan would ensure that he survived, and, in the likelihood that he were being defeated, the entire island would know he's fighting. She would know he was fighting. Wiping her tears away, they would do her no good. Robin gained a determined look on her face. She would find Rosan, but first, she had to get off this island. The redhead normally shrunk the white rose and put it in his pocket, so she'd have to find a new ship. The Modmod Nomi user really was reliable, and now that he was missing, Robin's life would be much harder. Without Rosan, she'd probably have to resort to joining organizations again, but that was okay. She'd do it if it brought her closer to her best friend. He would be fine. Thinking otherwise just wasn't a possibility. He was fine. He had to be. So why? Why wouldn't her tears stop? Why was she sobbing so pathetically when Rosan needed her? The redhead would hate to see her crying like this, But Rosan wasn't here to see her tears. He wasn't here, and there was a chance that he was the... Robin sobbed and sobbed to herself, hoping dearly that Rosan or Madchan would comfort her. Nobody answered her calls. Chapter end. And, so in case anyone's confused, there was two-year skips. Rosan is currently 8 and Robin is 12. The two have been traveling for 4 years, and for those interested in their adventures, there will be some bonuses about them at the end of my future chapters. It's about to get real. Next chapter is the reason I updated the rating to M, because it gets dark, and it's gonna take a while to come out. On the bright side, it's a massive chapter, so if you like reading, I'd assume most of you guys do, there's that to look forward to. The story is going to start heading in a pretty dark direction now, so I think I gotta start adding warnings. Until next time, here's the title of the next chapter.